Majestic Owl Publishing LLC presents Spring into Murder, Book 5 from Alaska Cozy Mystery Series. Written by Wendy Meadows. Read for you by Michelle, the AI Narrator. Chapter 1. Police Chief Preston Davis pulled into a parking space a short distance from something special. He took a deep breath. He was a little nervous. He had handled murderers and thieves and solved cases that seemed impossible to solve, but he had never felt this unstable. Preston had always been very good at his job and was committed to the police force of Rosemary Harbor. He always carried the safety of the citizens in his heart and did what needed to be done to keep the peace in the coastal town. Preston was less comfortable around women than he was around criminals. He had spent his life alone, married to his career. But everything changed when he met Hillary Sheridan. Even though it had taken a very long time to build toward a relationship with the reluctant woman, Preston believed he had finally reached his goal. At last, they were getting to be more than friends. His relationship with Hillary was strongly grounded in their friendship, but he wanted more, and it looked like she was ready to finally move on from her deceased husband. Preston climbed out of his car with the carefully calligraphed note and walked toward the shop. When he pushed open the door, the bell above it jingled, announcing his arrival. "Top of the morning to ya, Spot," the mouthy parrot squawked. "Morning, Preston," Annabelle said with a smile. She stood behind the counter, phone in her hand. "Good morning," Preston said with a smile. "Is your mom in?" Annabelle nodded. "She's in the back. I'll get her for you." Annabelle disappeared into the staff room, and as she did, Preston turned to Spot. "Deliver this for me, will you?" He offered the parrot the note he had brought with him. "That's not a cracker," Spot screeched after tipping his head side to side and inspecting the note. "The cracker comes after you deliver the note." Preston wasn't sure if Spot understood what he was trying to say. It was only a bird, after all. But Spot grabbed the note, flapped his wings, and flew across the shop to Hillary, who had just stepped out from the staff room. "Oh!" Hillary exclaimed when Spot dropped the note in her hand, landing on her shoulder. "What's this?" "You've got mail," Spot said, quoting the old computer voice that used to announce it before laptops and smartphones took over. "I see that," Hillary said. She glanced at Preston with a smile and opened it. Annabelle took her place behind the counter again. "Oh, Preston," Hillary said with a smile. "I'd love to." Preston grinned. "Love to what?" Annabelle asked, distracted from her phone. "What's happening?" "Preston asked me to be his date to the police ball. I'm going with him." "As my girlfriend, I hope," Preston said. Hillary blushed, and it was sweet to see a woman of her years feel flattered by a man's advances. "What?" Annabelle asked. She looked from Preston to Hillary, and her stomach turned to see the two staring lovingly at each other. "You can't seriously think of going?" "And why not?" Hillary asked. Annabelle was filled with dread. Her mother had remained committed to her father until his death. Since they arrived in Rosemary Harbor, Preston had been sweet on Hillary. Annabelle thought Hillary was betraying Matthew by getting involved with Preston. Until now, Annabelle didn't have much of a reason to worry. Hillary and Preston had gone out on what they called dates, but Annabelle had been convinced they were just very good friends. As it turned out, Preston wanted more than friendship from Hillary. And to Annabelle's horror, Hillary was all right being announced as Preston's girlfriend. She tried to contain her disdain, but it was impossible. She had watched her parents' relationship as she grew up, and Hillary and Matthew had the best marriage Annabelle had ever heard of. She believed that despite her dad passing away, Hillary must be faithful to him. Going with Preston to the police ball, as his girlfriend no less, was everything but respecting her marriage to Matthew. In fact, Annabelle saw it as a betrayal, and it had to be stopped. "That sounds like a nice way to announce a relationship," Annabelle said sweetly. Hillary and Preston both looked at Annabelle, surprised. She had done everything in her power to let them know how upset she was about them potentially dating when Preston first started courting Hillary. "Really?" Hillary asked carefully. Annabelle nodded. Oh yes. What better way is there than to make the announcement publicly? This place will have a field day spreading the story. Hillary nodded slowly. Annabelle was right, of course, but she saw how unsure her mother was about her reaction. Her mind spun, looking for a way to cut Hillary's happy moment short. If she couldn't stop her mom from making a mistake and abandoning the memory of her father, Annabelle would try another way. She could distract Hillary from Preston. She would do what was necessary. Was it mean? In a way, yes. But Annabelle couldn't just stand idly by. In fact, she carried on, I think Giovanni and I will do the same thing for our engagement. What? Hillary cried out, and the horror on her face was exactly what Annabelle was going for. You're engaged? Not yet, Annabelle admitted. But we will be as soon as we figure out the details. Preston looked shocked, perhaps at the way Annabelle was announcing it. He glanced at Hillary, who still looked horrified. This is ridiculous, Hillary finally said. Annabelle was defiant. She wanted her mother to challenge her on it, so Annabelle could remind her that she was old enough to do whatever she wanted. Hillary didn't like Giovanni, but there was nothing she could do about Annabelle and Giovanni dating. This was only more of the same. Instead of confronting Annabelle about her announcement, as Hillary was sure Annabelle wanted, she shook her head and swallowed her words. She needed time to process it. Thank you for your invitation, Hillary said, turning to Preston. We can talk about details later. Preston looked unsure, as if he had been expecting a family dispute. He nodded, a little dazed. I have to get back to the office. I'll call you. With that, he turned and left the shop. Get out while you can, Spot squawked. Everyone stoically ignored the parrot, who sometimes knew exactly the wrong thing to say. When Preston was gone, Hillary and Annabelle stared at each other for a moment. Hillary could see her daughter gearing up for a fight, and she knew that if she argued about what Annabelle just said, no matter how valid her points, she would only have a fight and a rebellious daughter on her hands. If she told Annabelle she couldn't marry Giovanni, it was exactly what Annabelle would do. Instead, she remained silent. Rose came into the shop with the coffee she had set out to buy from Antonio's. Immediately, she felt the tension. What happened? She asked. Mom is going to the police ball as Preston's girlfriend, Annabelle said. She looked at Hillary, challenging her to add to it. Hillary didn't rise to the bait. She offered Rose a wan smile. That's right, she said. Her insides were tight with terror about what Annabelle said. Marriage? She couldn't stomach the thought. Will you help me unpack boxes in the storage room? Hillary asked Rose. A shipment came in just after you left. Of course, Rose said, sensing that Hillary wanted to talk. Annabelle picked up her phone and carried on texting. As soon as Hillary and Rose were in the storage room, Hillary let loose. I can't believe that child, she whispered fiercely. She couldn't scream and shout as she wanted with Annabelle so close by. She relayed everything that had happened, and Rose listened with burning curiosity. When Hillary finally finished, she added, We can't let this happen. And how will you stop it? Rose asked. She knew as well as Hillary did that Annabelle would do anything she was told not to, especially when it came to Giovanni. We have to find someone else for her, someone that will distract her until she doesn't want Giovanni anymore. That's easier said than done, Rose said. I know. Hillary sat down on a box, exasperated. Her mind ran feverishly through the options in town. There weren't very many bachelors in town, but surely she could find someone. What about Milo? That doctor that's so popular now? Rose asked. Hillary shook her head. I don't like him. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about him that bothers me. If you want to find someone to distract Annabelle, you have to be less fussy, Rose said. I was less fussy, Hillary snapped. I let her date Giovanni against my better judgment, and look where that got us. Rose put her hands on Hillary's arms. I know this is upsetting, but Annabelle is 25. She can do whatever she wants. You didn't let her date Giovanni, it's her choice. Hillary sighed and nodded. She knew Rose was right, but she couldn't stand the thought of her daughter marrying someone less than worthy. The front doorbell jingled, and Hillary and Rose fell silent, listening. Hillary hoped it wasn't Giovanni coming to say hello to Annabelle. There was only so much she could handle in one day. How are you, Rafe? Annabelle asked, and Rose and Hillary looked at each other, no doubt thinking the same thing. Rafe Slavin was a resident of Rosemary Harbor, and he was only a few years older than Annabelle. He was recently divorced, but rumor had it his wife left him, and not the other way around. He was very attractive, kind to everyone he met, and he was established as a businessman. He had his own personal training business called Revenge Body that did well enough for him to be financially stable. In short, he was boyfriend material, if not only a wonderful distraction. He's perfect, Hillary said. He's single, right? Praise indeed, Rose said with a giggle. I think so. Let's see what we can set up. Hillary and Rose both emerged from the storage room. Rafe, how are you? Rose asked. Very well, thank you, Rafe said. Mom, Annabelle interrupted. Can I head out for a bit? Taryn just told me there's a sale at Heels, and I want to get something before the stock is cleared. Of course, Hillary said, almost too hastily. We've got things under control here. Hillary was glad Annabelle was leaving the shop. She wanted to convince Rafe to take Annabelle out, and that wasn't going to be so easy with her daughter in the shop. She was also more than happy to let her daughter go to a shoe sale, rather than meet up for coffee with Giovanni. What can I help you with? Hillary asked Rafe when Annabelle left the shop. I don't quite know, Rafe said. I'm looking for a gift for Milo Grandview. What's the occasion? Hillary asked. Is there really an occasion where a gift isn't welcome? Rafe asked with a charming smile. Hillary smiled too. She looked at Rafe through young eyes and saw a man who could potentially charm her daughter. What are you looking for? Hillary asked. I was hoping you could give me a couple of suggestions, Rafe answered. Hillary nodded and pointed out the few favorites for men, but Rafe didn't seem very interested in what was available. Are you going to the restaurant opening? Hillary asked after they had talked shop for a moment. I think so. It's always fun to have something new pop up in town. I actually have reservations for a table, but the friend I was going with backed out. So I don't know. Hillary nodded. You should take a date. Rafe chuckled. That's a novel idea. I don't think dating is quite my thing for now. Why not? Rose asked. An attractive man like you shouldn't waste away alone. Rafe chuckled again, and it looked like Rose's compliment had gone down well. What about Annabelle? Hillary suggested. Isn't she going with Giovanni? Rafe asked. Annabelle and Giovanni had been dating long enough that everyone around town knew they were together. Since he had been arrested as a murder suspect, everyone knew who he was, and it was not long before Giovanni and Annabelle made their relationship official. There was nothing like hot gossip to attach an even hotter story to. Giovanni is going out of town, unfortunately, Hillary said. This was the truth. Giovanni told Annabelle he needed to visit his grandmother out of town, and Annabelle had been disappointed that she couldn't attend the restaurant opening with him. I am going with Preston, so I don't want her to feel like a third wheel, Hillary continued, and she really wants to go. Rafe looked unsure. Of course, if you'd rather not, you're under no obligation, Rose interjected. We were only trying to help Annabelle. She was so disappointed. Rose's approach seemed to work. Rafe sighed. I'll consider it. Maybe I'll take Annabelle out for a drink tonight, see what she thinks. Oh, that would be wonderful, Hillary said. You're a real saint, Rose said, and Rafe smiled. He didn't seem sure about it, but Giovanni would be out of town, and with Rafe's handsome charm, Hillary was sure Annabelle wouldn't refuse. Rafe decided not to buy something right away, as he couldn't decide on what to get. When he left the shop, Annabelle was on her way in. He caught her just outside the door, and Rose and Hillary watched as they talked. After a while, Rafe took his leave and Annabelle walked into the shop. "I'm going out tonight," Annabelle announced. Rose and Hillary glanced at each other. "Honey, do you think that's a good idea?" Hillary asked. If she suggested that Annabelle shouldn't go out, she knew Annabelle would do exactly that. "Don't wait up," Annabelle said. Hillary shrugged and turned to the storage room with a smile. Mission accomplished. Chapter 2. Friday was the opening night for Harbor Hefeweizen, a new restaurant that was opening its doors in Rosemary Harbor. It was a thrill when something new came to town, and rumor had it that it was going to be one of the biggest events of the year. The owner, John William, had suggested that he would have all kinds of opening night specials as well as entertainment. As soon as Preston heard about it, he called to reserve a table for him and Hillary. He was glad he did. There were only so many tables available, and he had heard a lot of grumbling around the station from colleagues who couldn't get a table because they waited too late. Hillary looked breathtaking when Preston picked her up. She smiled when he complimented her, and they made small talk in the car, but he couldn't help but feel that Hillary was distracted. It wasn't unusual for her to have something on her mind, but this was worse than usual. When he asked her, she replied that nothing was wrong. They parked as close to the restaurant as possible behind a long chain of cars on the street and walked the last of the way. "Your table is this way," Taryn said. She was one of Annabelle's friends, and she had secured a job at Harbor Hefeweizen when John first started hiring. "Could we possibly sit over there?" Hillary asked when Terry led them to a booth. Taryn frowned. "Are you sure that's where you want to be?" When Hillary nodded, she shrugged and led the way. The table they sat down at was closer to the kitchen and not nearly as comfortable as the booth. It had a view of the whole restaurant, which Preston guessed was the reason for Hillary's request, but he would have much preferred to spend time with Hillary in the privacy of the booth rather than sitting where everyone walked back and forth with plates and orders or a trip to the restroom. Ultimately, Preston didn't care where they sat, as long as he could have alone time with Hillary. He hadn't had a chance to talk to her for a few days. "I'm looking forward to the police ball," Preston said to Hillary. "Me too," Hillary said. "We need to discuss what we're going to wear. I'd like for us to match." "What did you have in mind?" Hillary asked. Despite her questions, she seemed distracted. "Something that will make us look like a couple." Preston carefully watched Hillary's expression for some kind of response. He didn't have the feeling she was here with him at all. Perhaps in body, but in her mind, she was distant. She glanced around, and he couldn't tell what she was looking for. "Did you hear what I said?" Preston asked. "I want to introduce you to the force as my girlfriend." "I think we can do something like that," Hillary said. The seating hostess came past with another couple, and Hillary glanced at them. She was giving more attention to everyone around them than she was giving Preston, and he was a little irritated with it. He had hoped that the night would be romantic, with just the two of them spending time together and enjoying the entertainment provided by the opening night of the restaurant. But Hillary didn't seem as into it as Preston was. He wondered, not for the first time, if she wanted to be with him like that at all. Sure, she had been going on dates with him, and for a while she had seemed very interested, which was something he had waited for a long time. But none of that was official. And now that he was talking about making it official, Hillary seemed to be focused on everything but him and the prospect of being together as a couple. Was she doing it on purpose? He wondered if this was harder on her than she liked to show. When Hillary first came to Rosemary Harbor, Preston had been very interested in her. Not only was she beautiful and interesting, full of life and funny, but she had a sharp mind and a keen eye for detail, and he enjoyed that about her. He liked Hillary for her compassion and the way she was headstrong when she set her mind to something. Even if it meant that they bumped heads from time to time, because Hillary had only one way, and that was her way. After their argument about Rose being detained as a suspect, Preston had lost all hope of having Hillary as a friend, never mind something more. But since then, their relationship had taken an unexpected turn, and she seemed to have moved on from Matthew, her late husband. Although, now Preston was starting to wonder if that really was the case. He liked Hillary and he wanted to be with her, but if she wasn't willing to leave Matthew in the past, he wasn't sure how well they could make it work. Was Hillary dragging her feet because she didn't want things to become official between them? Surely she would have said something. Hillary had been very straightforward about where she stood with Preston in the beginning, when he had first taken her out. He didn't doubt that she would do it again if it was how she felt. And seeing that she wasn't saying anything, what could it be? He glanced down at Hillary's hand. On her ring finger, her wedding band shimmered as always. Preston had never been bothered by it before. He had always felt that it was for Hillary to decide if she wanted to hold on to it. Something as personal as a wedding ring held immense sentimental value, especially if their relationship had been as good as he had gathered. But maybe he had interpreted the signs wrong. Maybe Hillary really wasn't ready to find new love and had no intention of taking the next step in their relationship. The idea upset Preston. He had finally thought that they were headed somewhere. If it turned out that Hillary wasn't interested after all, it would hurt. When he made his move the first time, she shot him down, but at least he knew where he stood. If she was leading him on now, he wouldn't be able to be friends with her. The idea of losing Hillary as a friend, let alone a romantic interest, only upset Preston even more. He had come to value Hillary and their conversations very much. Perhaps Preston could get Hillary to talk about it. He didn't want to ask her outright because that seemed rude, but he wanted to find out where she was, mentally and emotionally. The past can be so hard to let go of sometimes, Preston said. Hillary nodded. You're telling me. Annabelle won't let go of Matthew and the family we used to be, but she doesn't consider that it has to go both ways. Preston frowned. He wasn't sure what Hillary was talking about. Hillary's mind was on Annabelle and her relationship with Giovanni. She wasn't sure why Preston was commenting on Annabelle's inability to let go of what they'd once had, but she was glad she could talk to him about it. She was worried that talking about Annabelle all night would ruin their date in his eyes. She's so serious about Giovanni, even after everything she found out about him. There are so many reasons why she shouldn't be with him, and she knows it. But she's insisting on making it work. Why do you think that is? Preston asked. When Hillary glanced at him, he looked confused. Of course, he didn't know as much about Annabelle's relationship and history with Giovanni. Out of respect for her daughter's choices, Hillary never talked ill about Giovanni when she was with Preston, even though she didn't approve of their relationship at all. Annabelle idolized my relationship with Matthew. Since she became aware of love and family, she aspired to have a relationship like we had. The downfall is that she doesn't believe it's possible to find love with more than one person. Preston nodded, and Hillary took it as an encouragement to carry on. Even though I do believe very strongly in one partner for the rest of your life, divorce was never an option for Matthew and I, and we worked through our issues when we had them. Finding love again isn't a bad thing. But Annabelle is so stuck on her idea about fate and only ever having one love that I fear it's affected her in more ways than one. You mean not just with what we could become? Preston asked. Hillary nodded. She's unhappy about the prospect of us dating, and she thinks I'm somehow betraying Matthew. But she also believes that she has to make it work with Giovanni, no matter what. But she is so young, and they're not married yet. She can find someone else. What do you think about it? Preston asked. I think that Annabelle deserves better. Preston shook his head. It wasn't what he had been asking. Hillary seemed to have misunderstood Preston's initial question completely, her mind entirely on Annabelle's choice in a partner and not on her own. But Preston wanted to know how she felt about finding love a second time for herself, not for Annabelle. And what about you? Are you fated to only be with one love in your life and no more, even if that love story is over? Hillary looked at Preston. I do believe in fate if that's what you're asking. It wasn't what Preston was asking at all. How could he get her to answer his question without asking her straight up why she seemed so disinterested in him? He didn't want to make a fuss. But I also think that fate has a way of having a reset button once something ends. At that, Preston felt relief. Surely that meant that Hillary was finally ready to try again. She had been giving him signs that she was interested, after all. And Hillary had never been the type to change her mind about what she wanted all the time. So, if she showed Preston that she wanted to be with him, even if she hadn't put it in so many words, it had to be true. Hillary's eyes slid across the dining room again, her thoughts distracted. Preston didn't understand it. What was she thinking about? What was she searching for? When they were trying to solve a case and Preston asked Hillary to help, she searched for clues and always seemed to know the right places to look. But there were no open cases that needed solving, and there was nothing he could imagine to distract Hillary this much. As he watched, Hillary perked up and sat up a little straighter. Her eyes sparkled. Preston turned to see what she was looking at and noticed Annabelle being led through the tables along with Rafe Slavin, the fitness instructor. Is Giovanni not escorting Annabelle tonight? Preston asked. It was strange to see Annabelle with someone else, especially right after Hillary had told him that Annabelle believed she had to make it work with Giovanni no matter what, rather than finding greener pastures while she was still able. Giovanni is out of town, Hillary said simply. I asked Rafe to bring Annabelle to the opening. She was so disappointed when Giovanni couldn't bring her. Rafe is such a gentleman. Preston looked at Hillary. Her mouth curled into a small smile, and she watched her daughter as they were led to another table not too far from them. It made sense now why Hillary had sacrificed their booth for this table, which wasn't nearly as nice, and in the middle of the scuffle to and from the kitchen. She wouldn't have been able to watch the door from the booth, and she had been waiting for Annabelle to arrive with Rafe. This is the second time she's out with him, Hillary said, and she sounded pleased with herself. Suddenly, it all fell into place. The conversation about Annabelle finding love with someone other than Giovanni, Hillary being interested in whether he would bring her to the opening, her distraction. Whatever was going on with Hillary, it had nothing to do with her own life and her relationship with Preston. It was about Annabelle and her love life. Preston understood Hillary's obsession with Annabelle's love life. He didn't have children of his own, but he knew how he would have felt if he had a daughter, and he needed to keep her safe. Raising children was hard. He didn't have to have children of his own to understand that. But Hillary was so distracted, so caught up in Annabelle's relationship, that Preston wondered if she would be able to pay attention to their own relationship. Hillary didn't very often divide her focus, and even though this had nothing to do with her own feelings for Preston, something that should have been a relief, he wondered if she could be fully invested in him. Preston wasn't selfish. He understood Hillary was a mother, and that Annabelle would occupy her thoughts more often. But there was a line to be drawn, and if he was going to be her boyfriend, Preston wanted to be right up there with Annabelle in terms of importance. He didn't want to have to take second place in any way. Annabelle was an adult with her own life after all. And Preston wanted Hillary to be present in their own relationship. Chapter 3. I don't think this is going to work for me, Preston said and stood up. What do you mean? Hillary asked. I came here to spend time with you, but I don't get the feeling that is going to happen. I'm going to have a drink before I head home. Hillary shook her head, confused. Preston knew that he wasn't being very gentlemanly by walking away, but he had reached his limits in more ways than one. He had pursued Hillary since she had come to live in Rosemary Harbor with Annabelle. She had played hard to get from the start. This time, Preston had truly thought they were past all the stumbling blocks that had kept them apart at first, but it seemed that it wasn't so. Hillary might always have something going on, he thought. She might always have a reason why it was not a good time for them to be together. Preston didn't think that she was doing it on purpose. Hillary wasn't the type to tease a man for kicks. But even if it wasn't intentional, Preston was tired of being toyed with. He weaved through the tables and headed toward the bar, which was 3 customers deep in all directions. Still, he needed a drink, and he needed to get away from Hillary. There were occasions when being an officer of the law counted in Preston's favor. This time was one of them. The crowd at the bar parted slightly at Preston's arrival, making a space for him as if it was a crime to be in his way in the first place. Usually, Preston would have insisted that he wait his turn, but this time he thanked the patrons for moving and took the space without thinking twice. "Whiskey on the rocks, please." Richelieu, 3 fingers. The bartender nodded and hurried to fill the order. Preston leaned on the bar with his elbow, his mood dark as Hillary appeared next to him. "Why are you angry?" Hillary asked. Preston looked at Hillary and wondered how he was going to word it. They had had disagreements before, but usually they were about a case. Hillary had tended to get involved where Preston didn't want her at first. One of the cases had been personal to Hillary when her involvement was unwanted. Besides those disagreements, Preston and Hillary hadn't fought. Their first real fight, Preston thought. It would have been that much more prolific if they were dating officially. Which was exactly the problem. "I know that you're worried about Annabelle," he said. "But she's 25. It's not that she's fresh out of school. She's been in the world a few years now, and she's a full-fledged adult." Hillary nodded slowly. "You need to let her make her own mistakes." Hillary sighed. "It's different when it comes to love. I always thought we were giving her such a good example to follow, but now I'm scared that we taught her that it's easy to find true love. And it's not." Preston shook his head. "What if it is for her?" Hillary looked upset. "It can't be. Not with Giovanni. I know we can't help who we love, but that can't be who she ends up with. He's not right for her." Preston shook his head. "Just because you don't like him doesn't mean he's a bad guy." "I didn't say he was a bad guy," Hillary replied quickly. "Just the wrong guy." Preston shook his head. "He's not the worst person out there. We did a murder investigation on him. We checked him out in every way possible. If the worst thing about him is that he has a past, is it really so bad?" Hillary was upset about what Preston was saying. Not only was he right, which was a bitter pill to swallow, but he was saying exactly what she didn't want to hear. Hillary didn't want to know that Giovanni wasn't a bad guy. She didn't like him and didn't want her daughter to be with him. She wanted Preston on her side. Instead, he was being rational. It infuriated her. She opened her mouth to give Preston a piece of her mind. She knew they were going to go into a fight about this, but she had to say her part. Before she could get a word out, Preston's phone rang. Preston's job as police chief always took precedence. When he glanced at his phone with a frown, Hillary knew it was the station. They wouldn't call Preston unless it was work-related, and Preston would always answer. He was a wonderful police chief and brilliant at his job. Even though Hillary had helped with some of the cases, it was thanks to Preston that the citizens of Rosemary Harbor could sleep as soundly as they did. "What is it?" Preston asked into his phone, answering without letting Hillary speak. He listened for a moment, his eyes sliding to Hillary, and she knew the look on his face. Something had happened. "I'll go right away," Preston said and hung up. Hillary expected as much. She knew Preston would take whatever case had just popped up. It was his job, and he was as committed to it as Hillary was to her daughter. She understood duty and personal investment. On that note, Hillary had a lot she wanted to say. She was dedicated to being a mother to Annabelle and teaching her the ways of the world, but Preston made her sound like a helicopter parent. And that wasn't her. She only wanted the best for her daughter. Hillary glanced at Annabelle and Rafe, who were seated in a booth not far from the bar. They were seated so that they wouldn't notice Hillary unless Annabelle was specifically looking for her, and Hillary wanted to keep it that way. Annabelle was having a good time. She was laughing and smiling at Rafe, and Hillary could recognize a sweet flirtation from a mile away. It made her happy to think that Annabelle might be keeping her options open, after all. If she could only distract Annabelle from Giovanni with more prospects so that her daughter would think twice before marrying him, Hillary would be happy. Hillary turned back to Preston, who was making calls on his phone to various officers about what had just taken place. She wasn't paying attention to the conversation. Her focus was on Annabelle. But that didn't mean that she was getting unnecessarily involved, no matter what Preston said. He had no children of his own. He would never understand the paranoia that came with raising children, wondering if the right choices had been made. Preston's hand was on his drink while the other was on the phone that he pressed to his ear. He turned the tumbler around and around on the bar. His attitude had changed from the attentive date she had been with all night to the serious police chief she had come to know when she moved to Rosemary Harbor. Suddenly, she felt a little guilty about how she had behaved throughout the night, distracted instead of giving Preston the attention he had bestowed on her. But Annabelle was on the verge of making a mistake, and Hillary had to stop it somehow. She would have a million dates with Preston as soon as she knew that Annabelle wasn't going to give her life to someone who was less than deserving. "I have to head out," Preston said, pushing his drink away after he had only taken a sip or two. "Will you catch a ride home with Annabelle? I need to head straight to a crime scene, and it's not the date I had in mind." Hillary glanced at Annabelle. She couldn't march up to her daughter and ask for a lift home. Annabelle had asked Hillary to stay away from them completely. She knew what her mother was like, and Hillary had reluctantly agreed not to get involved at all. She was terrified that if she got involved now, Annabelle would throw away the potential there was to develop something with Rafe solely for the sake of getting away from Hillary. Besides, Hillary had a lot more she wanted to say to Preston. She wasn't done talking, and even though he had a case on his hands, she wanted her voice to be heard. "I think I'll come with you," Hillary said, clutching her bag under her elbow. Preston shook his head. "This is police work." Hillary rolled her eyes. "How many cases have I been involved in? I've been at more than one crime scene too. I'm coming with you. I don't want to crash Annabelle's night." Preston opened his mouth to argue, but Hillary didn't want to hear it. She turned and walked from the bar, knowing that Preston would follow. They walked to his car with Hillary leading, and she waited patiently at the passenger door until Preston unlocked the car for her. When she climbed into the car, Preston slid into the driver's seat and turned the ignition. It was warm in the car. It was a little strained between the two of them, but Hillary knew that it would blow over as their previous fights had. It was only a disagreement, nothing more. "I'm sorry about messing up the night," Hillary said, feeling that it was necessary to apologize. She didn't regret that she was trying to spare Annabelle pain and heartbreak, but the moment she saw the change in Preston when he took the case, she realized he had been very invested in the evening with her, and she should have been the same. "There's nothing to apologize for," Preston said tightly. "Don't be like this. I know I was wrong, and I'm apologizing for it." Preston glanced at her. "It's okay. This night is being cut short anyway. I thought everyone in town would be at the restaurant opening, but I guess not everyone is as interested in the economic development of the town as I thought." Hillary smiled. "I don't think it had anything to do with economic development. I think it was about who was there and what gossip was to be had." Preston shrugged. "It never changes around here." They drove in silence for a while. Preston seemed caught up in his thoughts, and Hillary's mind wandered back to Annabelle. She hoped her daughter was having the best time of her life. Which brought her back to what she hadn't had a chance to tell Preston. She might have needed to apologize to him for ruining the night through her own hidden agenda, but that didn't change the fact that Preston had offended her by suggesting she was an overbearing parent. Preston drove through the night, his mind on the case. He had gotten a call from the station about a murder, and even though he had been with Hillary, this time he didn't mind that their night was cut short. It hadn't been nearly as fun with Hillary as he thought it would be. He would much rather have preferred for Hillary to go home. They had been arguing, and even though they seemed to have made their peace now, he still didn't want the distraction. Hillary had made it clear that she was coming with him, and even though he had been upset with her, he couldn't exactly send her away to get home by herself. That would be rude of him after he picked her up to take her out. I heard what you said about letting Annabelle make her own mistakes, and I understand what you meant, Hillary started. Preston groaned inwardly. He wasn't in the mood to talk about this right now. Someone had just lost his or her life. But I'm not a bad parent, you know. I didn't say you were a bad parent, Preston answered. I dedicated my whole life to my family, to being there for Annabelle and helping her through the good times and the bad. We are this close for a reason. That doesn't happen for nothing. Preston sighed. I understand that. I was only trying to say. Annabelle is making a mistake being with Giovanni. Annabelle has never been in love, not really. She won't know what a bad choice is until it breaks her heart. That's all good and well, but she's talking about marriage. Marriage, Preston. You can't tell me you think that's a good thing. Preston shook his head. He didn't think marriage was a good idea unless you were convinced it was your soulmate. There was a reason he was single, married to his career, and ready to step in for anyone who needed it. He understood the gravity of the situation. But at the same time, he also believed in independence and learning from your mistakes. Everyone went through it. The problem with being so close to your daughter is that it becomes hard to step back, Preston finally managed to say. And the worst will be when Annabelle pushes you away. How much more will it hurt if she doesn't share anything with you, but still decides to be with Giovanni? Hillary was angry. She couldn't believe Preston would suggest such a thing. But of course, he was right. What if Annabelle decided to marry Giovanni, but instead of seeking Hillary's approval, she got married without even inviting Hillary to the wedding? Hillary didn't want to admit it, but Preston had a point. She had been feverish about Annabelle lately, especially since she had developed a crush on Giovanni, because she had known that the man was no good, and she might have become a little interfering. Which was exactly what Preston was trying to say, wasn't it? But no, she wasn't going to let him know that. And she wasn't just going to silently agree, either. Maybe she had some things to think about, but she was going to figure it out for herself, and she was going to find a way to stop Annabelle from marrying someone who wasn't worth giving the time of day to. As Preston pulled up in front of a house in one of Rosemary Harbor's neighborhoods, Hillary stopped fuming about Preston's opinion about her parenting. They were here to investigate a case. Preston had mentioned something about a murder. Until now, Hillary had completely forgotten what they were coming for. And she suddenly felt bad that she had forgotten. Someone had died, and she was trying to pick a fight. Preston climbed out of the car. Hillary did the same. Preston looked around, looking for any signs of danger or distress. Hillary saw Preston unclipping his holster, ready to retrieve his gun if necessary. I'll wait out here, Hillary offered. Preston looked surprised, but he nodded. Usually, Hillary got herself completely involved with the cases, insisting on coming into the crime scene all the way, but this time she was going to respect Preston's job. Preston walked toward the house, and Hillary watched him. His whole demeanor shouted cop. After years of being on the force, Preston lived and breathed his job. He knew what he was doing, and Preston was a sight to behold when he was on duty. When he disappeared into the house, Hillary stood on the sidewalk. Her arms were folded across her chest. The breeze was cold and filled with the smell of the ocean as the breeze came from the east. "Good evening," someone said, and Hillary looked up. A woman had emerged from the house next door, and she smiled at Hillary. Hillary knew most of the people around town, but she hadn't seen this woman before. She was very well built, with not an ounce of fat on her. She looked like she spent a lot of time keeping her body in shape. "Hello," Hillary said. "Can I help you?" Hillary shook her head. "I'm waiting for someone." She nodded toward the house Preston had disappeared into. "Are you waiting for Milo?" she asked. Hillary frowned. "Is this Milo Grandview's house?" The woman nodded. "Yes. You wouldn't be the only one waiting for him." Milo Grandview was a bit of a legend around town, Hillary knew. He had come into town about a year ago, and he had somehow gone from zero to hero in no time at all, after he had been around for a short while. "I imagine he is very busy," Hillary said. "Oh, very." They stood in silence for a while. Hillary's mind wandered to Preston inside. If this was Milo Grandview's house, could it mean that he had been murdered? It would surely cause a great ripple if it were so. Perhaps it could be someone else. It could be that it wasn't Milo at all, couldn't it? "Rafe was here not too long ago," the woman said, and Hillary's head snapped up. "Rafe Slavin?" She nodded. "Even the fittest among us get sick from time to time, although he would never admit it. Too full of himself to suggest he might be flawed, just like the rest of us." Hillary wasn't sure if she wanted to hear someone speaking ill of Rafe. He was her saving grace when it came to Annabelle. "I'm surprised Rafe got a meeting with him at all. Milo is usually so busy, he hardly has time to wave at his neighbors, let alone take patients at home. But Milo is always ready to help." Hillary nodded. She had heard the same about him, but knowing that Preston was inside investigating a murder call left her cold. To think that Rafe might have been the last to see Milo alive. What if it was Milo who had died? It would mean they'd lost a great pillar of the community. And that seemed too sad to bear. Chapter 4. Hillary walked into something special and uncovered Spot's birdcage. "Morning, sunshine," Spot squawked, ruffling his feathers. Hillary opened the cage so Spot could fly freely around the shop, and she put feed in his bowl. Annabelle was off today, and Hillary and Rose were going to be alone. She had a lot she wanted to talk to Rose about, and it had to do with Annabelle and her romantic pursuits. It was easier to gossip about someone when they weren't around. Not only was Hillary's mind on Annabelle and her love life, but it was also on the crime that had taken place the night before and what she had heard from Milo's neighbor about Rafe being the last person to see Milo alive. When the doorbell jingled, Rose stepped into the shop. "Did you hear?" she asked, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright with the knowledge that she had new gossip to spread. "About Milo Grandview?" Rose nodded. "Killed in cold blood. Just last night, while everyone was distracted by the restaurant opening." She put her bag down and unwound the scarf she always wore. "I'm always amazed at how much crime happens right under our noses. The poor man. He was such a character, wasn't he? I liked him even when some people didn't." Hillary didn't respond. She hadn't really liked the man much. But someone obviously didn't like him enough to permanently get rid of him. No one deserves to die like that, though. To have your life robbed in the blink of an eye is awful. Rose nodded, and the two women stood in silence for a moment to respect the dead. "I have a bit of information you won't just find on the streets," Hillary said. Rose looked at her, her curiosity piqued. When there was gossip to be had, Rose couldn't help herself. "I spoke to Milo's neighbor last night, and she mentioned that Rafe was at Milo's house shortly before he was killed." "Rafe Slavin? Really?" Rose asked, coming to the counter where Hillary stood and leaning on it with her elbows, completely drawn in by the gossip. "What does that mean, do you think?" "I don't know," Hillary admitted. "One thing is for sure. I wouldn't want to be the last person to see a murder victim alive." I wouldn't want to be implicated in the crime because of it. Rose thought about it for a moment. Do you think Rafe could have done it? Hillary thought about it for only a second before she shook her head. He's such a good person. When we talked to him here in the shop, he was so open and kind. People like that don't commit murder. I agree with you that he's a nice person. I really liked him when he was here. But being open and kind means nothing when it comes to murder. I mean, look at the few people we knew who murdered before. Celeste, Megan. No one really looks like a murderer, do they? Hillary pulled up her shoulders. Of course, Rose was right. Speaking of Rafe, he and Annabelle seem to have hit it off quite well, Hillary said, changing the topic a little. It worked even better than we imagined it would. Rose nodded. It's a good sign if you ask me. About Rafe? Rose shook her head. About Annabelle. She's not as committed to Giovanni as we thought she was. Maybe the idea of marriage is a little further off than she made it sound. Maybe she was only trying to get back at you. Maybe, Hillary said. Either way, it was a wake-up call, knowing that if Annabelle keeps going on the path she's on now, that's where it will go for her. Rose nodded. I think it's great that she's trying different things and keeping an open mind about love. But do you think it's good for her with Rafe possibly implicated in things? What do you mean? Hillary asked. I'm just wondering how well she'll handle another person she cares about being arrested as a suspect in less than a year. Hillary hadn't thought about that. Rose was right. Annabelle had been so upset when Giovanni was arrested for Tara's murder, and Hillary had never considered that it could unravel Annabelle in the same way again. I'm sure it will be all right. They're not so close, no matter how much I wish they would be closer. It's still not a good thing that he was the last to see Milo alive. You know he's the first one that they'll go after. At least until they have more clues. Hillary nodded. She knew how Preston would go about it. She would probably do the same. But Rafe was such a good man, it was hard to think that he could be detained as a suspect. Rose and Hillary started preparing the shop for opening time while they carried on talking. Hillary unpacked a box of new ornaments onto a shelf while Rose started up the computer. I've been thinking about this thing with Annabelle, Rose said. Do you really think this is the best way to go? What do you mean? Hillary asked. She blew on one of the ornaments to get rid of small specks of dust before placing it on the shelf. I mean, maybe you shouldn't push Annabelle so hard into a different direction. If she really wants to be with Giovanni, isn't that for her to decide? Hillary groaned and picked up the empty box after packing out the contents. Not you too. Rose looked at Hillary, confused. What are you talking about? Did Preston say something? We nearly had a fight about it. We might have gone into it properly if it hadn't been for the murder call. Rose shook her head. It's just that she's old enough to make her own mistakes. That's what he said too. But surely I can't be expected to just not care what happens to my daughter? Rose came to Hillary and gave her a quick hug. You know that's not what we're saying. But you can hold on to her too tightly, and then she'll slip through your fingers completely. Hillary sighed. All I keep hearing from everyone is that I'm being an overbearing mom. What about a mom that loves her daughter and cares about her future? Rose opened her mouth to answer, but the front door opened, even though they hadn't turned the sign to announce they were open. Annabelle walked into the shop, and she looked positively radiant. Isn't today your off day? Rose asked. It is, Annabelle said. But I just had to come down here. I had the best night with Rafe last night. I wanted to tell you all about it. She was grinning at Rose and Hillary. While she told them in detail about her evening with Rafe, Hillary glanced at Rose, who raised her eyebrows. The reluctant woman, who had stated she was very much in love with Giovanni, was gone. In her place was a woman who seemed to have a huge crush on Rafe. Hillary tried to figure out where this had come from. It was what she had hoped for, of course. But she hadn't expected this. She had done a 180, from talking engagement to Giovanni to raving about Rafe, and Hillary was dumbfounded. After a while, Annabelle whirled out of the shop the way she had come in. Hillary and Rose stayed behind, both of them unsure what to say about Annabelle's reaction. Before they could talk about it, the shop had to be opened, and the first customers came into the store. It was busier than usual, and Hillary and Rose both had their hands full helping customers. It wasn't until much later that they finally got to talk about what had happened. The shop was finally quiet, and Hillary ran out to get them each a cup of coffee. When she returned, Rose was behind the counter making ribbons for the gift baskets. Hillary put Rose's coffee next to her and sipped her own cup. "Can you believe Annabelle this morning?" Hillary asked. "To tell you the truth, no, I can't," Rose said. "I didn't expect her to be this taken by him at all." Her eyes were practically shining. Did she ever look so content after seeing Giovanni? "Not that I recall," Hillary said. "I'm very pleased that it was such a success. But what you said about Rafe has been on my mind, and I'm not sure how it might affect her if Rafe is arrested or even just taken in for questioning." "If Preston is on top of things, he wouldn't be behind bars for long," Rose said. "It's not up to him," Hillary pointed out, sipping her coffee carefully and trying not to burn her lips on the hot liquid. "You know it's got to do with how easily he can find out who did it and what motive they had. It's never just cut and dry." Rose nodded and put down the ribbons she was working on, then picked up her cup to sip her coffee. "I hope this one isn't very complicated," Rose said after a moment. "Some of the murder cases have been so emotional." "Some of them have been a lot closer to home," Hillary pointed out. They had lost friends to murders in the sleepy town. Hillary had lived for years in Miami, where the crime was supposed to have run rampant in the streets in some areas, but it was only after she moved to Rosemary Harbor that she had to deal with a loss like that. It was ironic. Rose glanced at her wristwatch. "I need to run to the pharmacy," she said. "Will you be okay alone?" Hillary nodded. The shop was quiet after the morning rush, and there was plenty to do to keep her busy while her mind mulled over all the new information. After Rose left, Hillary picked up the ribbons and took over where Rose left off. Her fingers were used to the work now, and she could dedicate all her thoughts to what had been happening. Preston and Rose had both told Hillary that she was holding on too tightly to Annabelle, that she had to let her go. They had said it on separate occasions, and after Rose said it this morning, Hillary was starting to wonder if it wasn't better to do as her friends suggested. But Annabelle had walked into the shop in such a good mood, going on about how wonderful Rafe was. So far, Hillary's plan was working even better than she'd expected. To let it go now and give up when things were going so well would be a shame. Rafe could be the key to getting Annabelle to move on from Giovanni. Rose returned half an hour later and they continued to work side by side, preparing gift baskets, unpacking stock and rearranging items. Their conversation strayed from Annabelle to petty gossip, and they talked about other trivial things, too. After a while, the conversation turned back to the murder. Hillary didn't know much about Milo Grandview at all. She had always gone to other physicians, and she had never been one to go with the flow. When Milo had become the man around town, Hillary hadn't been compelled to run to him for treatment. She was happy with her doctor, and she had heard that the waiting list to get an audience with the new doctor was ridiculous. She never understood Milo's popularity. "Did you ever go to Milo for a checkup?" Hillary asked Rose. "Of course," Rose said. "An attractive young doctor like him. And he became a sensation overnight, so of course I had to get to know him. Not just that, I wanted to know if he really was worth his salt." "And?" Hillary asked. Rose shrugged. "He was charming all right. But he didn't seem so fancy to me. He wasn't much better than anyone else I had been to. Although he did promise to get his hands on some very rare medication for me. Maybe that's what made him so popular." Hillary frowned. Rare medication? What are you on? Oh, he suggested something, it's not what I'm on now. I declined it. I don't want to spend more than I have to. But it was nice to meet him, and he was every bit as charming as people said. Hillary smiled. Of course, Rose would go to a doctor purely for the sake of finding out what kind of man he was and whether the gossip was true. I wonder who would have had something so serious against him that they would commit murder, Hillary said, thinking out loud. Do you know of anyone? Of course, Rose said matter-of-factly. Dr. Rutherford. What? Rose nodded, sure of herself. He was very proud of his practice being strong enough that Milo's arrival couldn't shake him. When Milo's practice took off, he was very upset. He has 2 daughters in college, girls that didn't get scholarships. That has to be expensive. Definitely. And Cindy Rutherford was going on just the other day about the new kitchen she installed. I can tell you now, Dr. Rutherford wasn't very keen on the whole idea. He stood next to her with a pinched expression if I've ever seen one. But the kitchen is installed, and I'm sure Dr. Rutherford is coughing up a lot of money for it. The poor man, Hillary sympathized. She knew Cindy Rutherford, and being the wife of a doctor had gone to her head. She pranced around town like she was royalty. If you ask me, Rose carried on, having a new adversary in the field now is the wrong time for Dr. Rutherford to be in a financial pinch. Hillary nodded and thought about what Rose suggested. It was all speculation, of course, but it wasn't impossible. She would have to find out more, but it made sense that the other doctors in town would have been upset by Milo's arrival and his sudden rise to fame. They had all worked hard to get where they were, and even Hillary, who knew nothing of the medical field, knew that it was unusual for someone to rise up as quickly as Milo had. She had questions she suddenly wanted answered, and if there was something Hillary was good at, it was sniffing out the truth. Chapter 5. Hillary had always had a way with people. They leaned on her in times of need and confided in her when they felt they could talk to no one. It had helped her solve many cases, and not because she intended to betray anyone. Hillary was merely well-liked. That, combined with a sharp eye for anything out of the ordinary and a wonderful skill set of deductive reasoning, made Hillary the best amateur sleuth Rosemary Harbor had to offer. It was these skills that Hillary decided to put to use when she went to see Cindy Rutherford. It was the best way to find out information about Dr. Rutherford, and whatever his motive may have been if he had indeed killed Milo Grandview. Of course, Hillary wasn't going to ask Cindy anything blatantly outright. But she had often found that, if given the opportunity to talk, people tended to confess to things they might not have had they been asked directly. Cindy Rutherford was quite the socialite. She lived up to the grand name of being a doctor's wife, and she had taken it upon herself to organize social events for her friends. From time to time, she included other townsfolk as well. Once a month, Cindy hosted a meet and greet at one of the coffee shops in town. This time, it was at Antonio's, and Hillary had signed up. Although it wasn't a coffee shop, Cindy made it clear that she wanted to support Antonio's. With the Harbor Hefeweizen opening, she claimed she didn't want business to dwindle for Antonio's. It seemed like a noble cause to Hillary. Cindy seemed like the type of woman who would step in and do bake sales and fun days for the sake of raising money for one cause or another. Hillary dressed for the occasion at Antonio's and prepared to leave. She decided that right after the meeting at Antonio's might be the best time to speak to Cindy. If she could get the woman alone and eager to talk, she might find out something. When Hillary arrived, she announced that she was there for the meet and greet, and a waiter escorted her to a room that had been booked especially for that. It reminded Hillary of the time she had come to Antonio's for a book signing. She had been ushered to a room away from the dining room in much the same way. This time the room was beautifully made up with tables and chairs, fine cutlery, and music floating around. It was a little more like a debutante breakfast than a book signing queue. When Hillary walked into the room, everyone looked up. Cindy Rutherford stood and gracefully floated toward her. She wore a pastel dress suit, her colored hair neatly tucked into a bun in her neck, and her smile was as expensive as her shoes. "I'm so glad you could make it," Cindy said, squeezing Hillary's arms instead of hugging her. "Come sit down. I saved you a seat at my table." Hillary walked with Cindy to her table, and the proceedings started. The meet and greet was a morning filled with small activities that allowed the attendees to get to know each other, and Hillary found she enjoyed herself. It wasn't something she had expected. She was here with an ulterior motive, after all. But she drank tea and ate pancakes and laughed and joined in on the fun, and she found that she was able to relax for a while. The meet and greet eventually ended, but Hillary didn't leave as the others started trickling out one by one. Some of the people formed little groups, chatting before they left, and Hillary attached herself to these groups one at a time, joining in on the conversation until it was finally just Hillary and Cindy. Cindy moved from table to table, picking up the notepads she had handed out for the activities. "Let me help," Hillary said and started on the other end of the room. This was her chance to talk to Cindy about her new kitchen, her financial status, and any reason why Dr. Rutherford would have a reason to act out. "How are you and Preston doing?" Cindy asked, and it caught Hillary off guard. She had meant for Cindy to talk about herself, not to ask Hillary to elaborate on her own personal life. "We're all right," Hillary said. "We are very good friends, as you well know." "Friends only?" Cindy asked. She narrowed her eyes, and Hillary couldn't help but feel like she was being tested somehow. She suddenly felt she needed to defend herself and her relationship with Preston. She felt uncomfortable that Cindy could make her feel so on the spot. "We're more than friends, but the nature of our relationship is personal. I'm sure you know how easy it can be in this town to have a relationship pulled apart by everyone's speculations." She hoped to get Cindy on her side by making a statement about how hard it was in a town full of gossip. A camaraderie of sorts. But Cindy wouldn't have any of it. She shook her head. "I ask because you have been a topic of discussion for some time now." "Why doesn't that surprise me?" Hillary said sarcastically. "It's exactly what I was referring to. You see," Cindy carried on as if Hillary had said nothing, "there are women around town who are single and in search of companionship. Chelsea Slavane was interested, for one." "Isn't that Rafe's ex-wife?" Hillary asked. Cindy nodded. "You can't keep one of the town's bachelors to yourself if you're not going to be serious about him." "I beg your pardon?" Hillary said. She was so taken aback by the audacity with which Cindy had made her claim that she wasn't angry. "Not yet. I'm just saying it might be a good idea to cut bait and let one of the other divorcees have a chance," Cindy said matter-of-factly. As if they were talking about second-hand clothes or a used handbag that could go to a new home. "I must say that's very forward." Cindy pulled up her shoulders, not worried about Hillary's response. "It's hard to come by a good man around these parts. Rosemary Harbor is a small town. We need to be aggressive in our pursuits, don't we?" "Indeed," Hillary said. She was angry now. Her shock had finally subsided, and the right emotions caught up with her. "But as I need to remind so many people in town, my relationship is my own business, and I would appreciate it if you stayed out of it." Cindy lifted her hands as if to say, "What can you do?" and clasped them in front of her again in the most ladylike fashion. Hillary wanted nothing more than to storm out of the room and leave Cindy to her delusions of grandeur, but she had come here for a reason, and she couldn't give up. Not before she found out what she had come for. So she sighed dramatically and sank down onto the closest chair. "If I have to be honest, you've hit a nerve. Maybe a different angle would do the trick." "Oh." Hillary nodded and pressed her hand to her forehead. "I've been so distracted by Annabelle that I haven't had a chance to focus on myself. It's hard to be a mother." Cindy nodded sympathetically and walked toward Hillary, taking a seat next to her. At least they seemed to be on the same side now. I know exactly what you mean, Cindy said. Hillary thought Cindy was quite two-faced if she was able to change her tune so quickly. But if Hillary could get a bit of information out of the woman, she wasn't going to point it out. You do? Hillary asked, feigning surprise. You forget, I'm a mother of two. I have two girls in college, but I'm telling you, just because they're away doesn't mean it makes parenting any less stressful. I worry about them all the time. I can only imagine, Hillary said. It's exactly where I am with Annabelle. I'm always worried that she might make the wrong choices. Cindy nodded and agreed. And the shop is taking a lot of my time as well. Of course, Cindy answered. You're a working mother. I don't mean to step on your toes, but I have to say I'm very lucky to be able to stay home. My husband has always insisted that I be there for the girls, and it's made a world of difference. They're not getting themselves into trouble because I've always been there for them. If Hillary had any insecurities about being a mother, she might have been offended by Cindy's comment, but she wasn't. She knew she had been a good mother. This was all an act. I wish I had the same luxury. But with my husband in the grave, I have to work to bring in enough money to keep our heads above water. I wanted to give Annabelle the life she deserved. I can't imagine the expenses to give your girls a college education. Hillary hoped that Cindy would mention something about the money it cost to keep the girls in college. If money was Dr. Rutherford's problem, it would be Cindy who would spill the news. Even when she was being rude, she didn't seem to want to hide anything. She was always out there with everything, even if it was blunt. Oh, it is very expensive, Cindy said. And I have to tell you, there was a time when I wasn't sure we were going to afford it. We even thought about applying for financial aid, but that's not something I'm willing to do. Naturally. Hillary wasn't sure what was natural about it, but she let Cindy talk. The more she talked, the more Hillary would find out. You see, it's not just our living expenses that worry me, Hillary said when Cindy's conversation dried up a little, without any more information spilling out. Annabelle is talking about getting married, and that's going to cost me a pretty penny. Not to mention that I think she might be making a mistake. Oh, I know exactly how you feel. I have two daughters, so we will have to pay for two weddings. But luckily, we're not there yet. My girls aren't even dating, and I have told them explicitly that they shouldn't even look at boys until they've gotten their degrees. It's only a distraction. Hillary wasn't sure that Cindy Rutherford's daughters would listen or that it was healthy to forbid them to date, but it was drama she wasn't willing to get involved in. If anyone knows how expensive children can be, it's me, Cindy carried on. And you want to give them the best of everything, even if it comes at a cost greater than you thought you could afford. This was it, Hillary thought. This was where Cindy was going to confess to being in financial trouble. I'm so lucky that everything has gone so well for me. Lucky? Hillary asked. Oh yes. It's not common knowledge, but I was a silent partner in a boutique that recently became very popular. The payout alone was more than enough to cover the girls' college tuition and a wonderful new kitchen that I had installed. Did I tell you about it? Hillary nodded, even though she hadn't heard about it from Cindy directly. But she wasn't in the mood to hear about Cindy's kitchen when her idea that the Rutherfords were in financial trouble had just crumbled before her. What motive could Dr. Rutherford have had now? In fact, Cindy said, I might be able to help you. Help me? Hillary asked, and she was confused again. Every time she thought she knew where the conversation was headed, Cindy changed direction. Oh yes. I don't know why I didn't think about it before. The boutique happens to be the perfect place to look for bridesmaids' dresses, and I believe Tia will give you a discount if you buy in bulk. It's the perfect solution. She fished in her handbag and found a business card that she handed to Hillary. Hillary took the business card, a little dazed. Again, Cindy had managed to catch her off guard. It was happening more and more, and Hillary was starting to wonder if she should have come to speak to Cindy at all. Hillary had always managed to get people to talk to her and divulge their deepest secrets without her even asking. They would share their motivations for crimes that no one could have imagined they would commit. Hillary had believed her knack for getting people to open up would work on Cindy too. Instead, Cindy seemed to have drawn every little thing out of Hillary instead. Hillary was quite out of her depth. The conversation had gone in so many directions that she hadn't been able to keep up. When Hillary tried to play the sympathy card, she thought it would work because Cindy was also a mom. And even though she hadn't really meant to confide in her, Hillary thought that Cindy would at least be on her side with what she was going through. It was horrible that Annabelle could be married to someone Hillary didn't approve of, and Hillary imagined Cindy would understand something like that. Her conversation had mostly been an act, but her underlying worry and heartache were there. Instead of being on Hillary's side as she had expected a fellow mother to be, Cindy was giving Hillary a way to get her hands on bridesmaids' dresses. The very idea that it could go as far as that appalled Hillary, and she dropped the business card on the table as if it burned her. "Is everything all right?" Cindy asked. "You look upset." Hillary shook her head, working hard to compose herself again. "I just have a lot on my mind," Hillary said. She took her leave and left Antonio's. Hillary was stumped, and that didn't happen very often. She had gone to Cindy Rutherford's meet and greet to get information. She had hoped that she would find something out about their financial situation, something that would offer a motive to take out Milo Grandview. But all she found was a woman who had no shame in sticking her nose into Hillary's business, pretended to sympathize when she didn't care at all, and gave her a business card to a boutique for bridesmaids' dresses to a wedding Hillary hoped would never happen. And the financial motivation had fallen away as well, to top it all off. It had been nothing but a waste of Hillary's time, and she felt awful on top of everything. Somehow, Hillary had to find another way to find out what she needed to know. She wasn't fully convinced that Dr. Rutherford wasn't involved in Milo's murder somehow. The motivation might be different, but if he had been so upset about Milo's arrival, there were more than enough reasons why he could take Milo out if he really wanted to. After her run-in with Cindy, Hillary decided that it might be better to go straight to Dr. Rutherford for a consultation. Just because Cindy hadn't fallen for Hillary's talent for getting someone to open up, didn't mean that Hillary had lost her skill completely. She hoped Dr. Rutherford would be more open. In any event, Hillary was sure Dr. Rutherford would be a lot less accusing. Cindy had come across quite aggressively in her questioning, and how she had switched from one topic to the next, going from foe to friend in the blink of an eye. Perhaps Hillary should have gone to Dr. Rutherford from the start. Instead of looking for the number and phoning Dr. Rutherford's offices, Hillary made her way to the building where Dr. Rutherford practiced. The receptionist was a jolly woman who loved to indulge more than anything. She smiled at Hillary as Hillary walked to her. The woman filled the chair she was sitting in, and then some. The receptionist had blonde curly hair, more makeup than was necessary, and a smile that made up for all her flaws. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. Hillary shook her head. "No, I'm here to make one. I don't have your number." "Oh, here you go then," the woman said, shaking her curls as punctuation to her sentence. She handed Hillary a business card from the stand with Dr. Rutherford's office hours and contact details on it. "Thank you," Hillary said with a smile. This business card was a lot more welcome. "I'm Martha, by the way," she said with a happy smile. "When would you like to come in?" "As soon as possible," Hillary said. Martha squinted at her screen as she scrolled down, eyes flicking over the information. "Dr. Rutherford is not as busy as he used to be," Martha said. "He has a space available as soon as tomorrow morning at 9. "That's perfect," Hillary said. "I will be here." Martha gave her another broad smile. After entering Hillary's information into the system, she reached for an appointment card and wrote the information on it. She handed it to Hillary. "We'll see you tomorrow," Martha said brightly. Hillary left Dr. Rutherford's offices and headed back home. It was her day off, and Rose and Annabelle were manning the shop. It was strange not having anything to do. Hillary felt restless when she had time off, especially when she had a case on her mind. She mulled over what information she had already found and what information she still needed. It was always easier to think when she was busy with her hands, unpacking stock or rearranging shelves. But it was necessary to take time off now and then, and Hillary would force herself to try and relax. That she was stressed to the max only added to her need to take it easy. She had to calm down at the very least. Perhaps she would try to take a nap to pass the time. Chapter 6. Hillary had made an appointment with Dr. Rutherford in the hopes that she would find out something from him that Cindy Rutherford hadn't been willing to divulge. Of course, if she was going to go there under the guise of a doctor's appointment, instead of meeting by chance in a social setting, Hillary had to find something that would be a good enough reason to need a doctor in the first place. It wasn't very hard for Hillary to find a reason. She wasn't overdramatic, and she didn't look for an illness in every symptom she felt, but lately there were a lot of things that felt a little off about her body. That and her stress levels were through the roof. She knew why she was so stressed too. So much had happened lately in her life, and the murder case wasn't even on that list. Her relationship with Preston had been growing steadily since they had worked together on the Janet Hines murder, and Hillary had been fine with it. She had let go of Matthew, finally saying her final goodbyes to the ties in their marriage, and she had found peace and moved on. But Annabelle wasn't at all happy about Hillary's relationship status changing slowly over the past couple of months, and when they disagreed, it always made everything at home feel a little disjointed. Not only that, but Preston wanted to make things official. Hillary was agreeable to their relationship becoming more than friendship, but it was different to make it official to everyone in town. It wasn't that she was ashamed. She didn't know exactly what she felt. It all felt like it was moving a little fast. Not to mention Annabelle's relationship with Giovanni. If anything had moved fast, it was how serious they were. They had dated on and off for a while before going steady, but Giovanni was a womanizer, and Hillary wasn't sure that Giovanni had permanently ended things with all the women he had brought along from his past. And now Annabelle was talking about marriage. Hillary already didn't approve of Giovanni. There was no way she was going to accept him as a son-in-law. A part of Hillary was sure that Annabelle was only threatening her with marriage because she didn't want Hillary to be with Preston. But Hillary couldn't be sure that was the reason. What if she was serious about it? What if she really believed she loved Giovanni enough to want to spend the rest of her life with him? Hillary struggled to stomach the thought. And to make matters worse, everyone seemed to want her to change her mind. About Preston and what she felt for him, either they wanted her to back off or to officially announce her relationship with him. And about Annabelle, they wanted her to let Annabelle make her own choices. But it was impossible for Hillary to change her mind as if it was nothing, to stop caring about what was important to her, and let the cards fall where they may. Yes, Hillary had more than enough stress in her life to warrant her seeing Dr. Rutherford. Hillary arrived a little early for her appointment and found that the waiting room was empty. She always arrived early to be in the queue, but Dr. Rutherford didn't seem to be busy at all. "I'm here for my appointment with Dr. Rutherford," she said to the receptionist on duty. She was very different from Martha, with plain dark hair and suspicious eyes. "Hillary Sheridan?" she asked. Hillary nodded. "You can have a seat. Dr. Rutherford isn't in the office yet. While you wait, you can fill out this form." She handed a clipboard to Hillary, and Hillary turned around, then walked to the chairs in the waiting area. She sat down and read through the information on the form. It was all about stress and anxiety to find out which Hillary could be suffering from. She read the list and ticked off what she felt. Headaches, neck spasms, backache, heartburn, chest pain. Worry and irritability. On the list of things that could be symptoms, Hillary had ticked more than half. She was struggling with all the symptoms, but she hadn't thought they were related. A headache now and then couldn't mean that much, she'd thought. And she had thought her neck and back had been hurting because she did so much physical work at the store, bending over a lot, carrying heavy boxes and things like that. Maybe it wasn't all in her head, after all. Hillary had felt guilty that she was this upset about Annabelle's love life, and so panicked about her pending relationship with Preston. But maybe it was normal that she was feeling this way. Dr. Rutherford will see you now, the receptionist said to Hillary in a dull voice. Hillary hadn't realized that Dr. Rutherford had arrived. She stood up and walked through to his office. "Morning, Hillary," Dr. Rutherford said with a smile. He was warm and welcoming, and Hillary felt at ease right away. "Please take a seat. What can I help you with today?" Hillary handed Dr. Rutherford the form she had filled in and explained to him that she had felt very stressed lately. "Why do you think you feel so stressed?" Dr. Rutherford asked. Hillary wondered if Cindy had told her husband about the conversation she'd had with Hillary at Antonio's the previous morning. Hillary was almost sure Cindy wouldn't have been able to keep her mouth shut about it, but Dr. Rutherford didn't look like the type of man who entertained gossip. Hillary explained her situation to Dr. Rutherford, summarizing the things she was struggling with. She left out the details about her and Preston, but she told Dr. Rutherford about Annabelle. "I know you're not supposed to be a therapist. You're a general practitioner," Hillary said after finishing her story. Dr. Rutherford smiled. "You know, health has so much to do with emotional status. I don't think it would be fair of me to focus on only your physical symptoms, if they may be rooted in your emotions." Why was Dr. Rutherford so unpopular? He was a better physician than anyone Hillary had been to before. He cared on a personal level, and that was so hard to find. "If you ask me, you need to let your daughter make her own decisions," Dr. Rutherford said. Hillary sighed. "That's the long and the short of what everyone keeps telling me." Dr. Rutherford nodded. "I know it's hard. With 2 daughters, I can empathize. But Annabelle is old enough to live her own life, and you'll only wear yourself out if you push for something, and she's pushing right back. My advice is to focus on yourself. A healthy diet and exercise will help you feel better, physically and mentally. And you should let Preston pamper you once in a while." Hillary blushed a little when Dr. Rutherford mentioned Preston, but he didn't seem to notice. "It does wonders if you let go and let someone else worry about everything for a change. I know you're a single mother, and it can be hard when you're trying to stand in for 2 people. But make a point of putting yourself first. Your body will thank you for it in the long run." Hillary nodded. She understood what Dr. Rutherford was trying to say. She couldn't fix everything herself, and there was no way she could control it all. "From what I know, Giovanni isn't a bad kid," Dr. Rutherford said, and Hillary's stomach tightened at the mention of his name. Dr. Rutherford had managed to get her to relax a little, but he had ruined it all by commenting on Giovanni. "And you know what it's like to be young. We all had our hearts broken before finding the people we were meant to be with." Not me, Hillary thought. Matthew had been her first love, and they had been madly in love and strong as a couple until the day he passed away. Dr. Rutherford was pushing on. Hillary was starting to get irritated again. Dr. Rutherford had been doing so well. "What diet would you recommend for me?" Hillary asked, hoping he would change the topic and head away from the touchy subjects. "I have a couple of different diets," he said. "But I have been trying something new for the last few weeks, and it's really been working." "Oh." Dr. Rutherford nodded. "It's based on intermittent fasting." "Fasting as in not eating?" "Exactly," he said. "Cindy and I spend our evenings together from 6 o'clock, which is the last time we eat. We finish the day with a large healthy meal. I'll give you the breakdown. I leave for work in the morning and we meet again for a late lunch, which is our first meal of the day. It connects us romantically, too. So, you're only eating 4 hours out of the day? Hillary asked. Dr. Rutherford nodded. And then, when you can eat, the key is to have a very balanced diet with a lot of leafy greens and a lot of protein to make up for the time you didn't have anything in your system. Your body tends to get into an eating routine, and because of it, a lot of people overeat or eat unhealthy foods purely because they can. It becomes a reflex, no one thinks about it anymore. But if you do it this way, you shock your body by breaking out of the routine and you remain mindful of what you're putting in your body. So you're always healthy. Who developed this diet? Hillary asked. Oh, it's something I came up with myself, after doing extensive research. What do you do when there are social events? Like the restaurant opening? Dr. Rutherford shook his head. Until we're used to the diet, we're not going out at all. We want to avoid temptation. We gave the opening a miss. Hillary didn't believe that Cindy followed the diet as strictly as Dr. Rutherford thought she did. She had been eating tarts and pancakes at the meet and greet just yesterday, and she had seemed very shameless in doing so. Hillary wondered how Dr. Rutherford would feel if he knew that he was a lot more dedicated than his wife. Hillary wouldn't tell on Cindy, but purely so that Dr. Rutherford wouldn't realize his wife was betraying him in some way. If Hillary had to be honest about it, the diet didn't sound like a healthy idea. She always ate various small meals throughout the day to keep her blood sugar at the right levels. Only eating 4 hours out of 24 seemed dangerous. Hillary didn't want to try it. So she changed the topic again. What about medications for the stress? She asked. Is there something you would recommend? Something to help me relax? Or even to treat the symptoms for now? Dr. Rutherford sighed. If it's specific medication you're after, Grandview was the doctor for you. What do you mean? Hillary asked. Dr. Rutherford pulled a face. I don't believe in giving out unneeded medications. But Milo always filled every prescription, no matter what. He could get anything for anyone, and they fell for it. All of them. Why do you think my waiting room is so empty? Hillary frowned. I don't understand. Milo would fill any prescription, no matter what it was for. Brody Whiting, the pharmacist, was right in the middle of it too, dishing it out like it was candy when he got the note from Milo. It was unethical if you ask me. But no one did. They just packed up their loyalty to me and took it to someone else without asking questions. Chelsea Slavin was their favorite customer. Note I said customer and not patient. Chelsea Slavin? Dr. Rutherford nodded. I'm not one to gossip, but Cindy said Chelsea is mighty close with Milo. Or was at least. I can't imagine Rafe was happy about that. Why? Hillary asked again. If they were divorced, what difference did it make? I'm gossiping like a woman, Dr. Rutherford said. All I'm saying is that Milo Grandview is really doing whatever it takes to make it in this world. And it's working, damn him. Dr. Rutherford sounded mighty bitter, talking about losing all his patients to Milo Grandview. It made sense now why Dr. Rutherford wasn't so busy anymore. But that would pick up now that Milo Grandview had been murdered. Hillary wondered about Dr. Rutherford's comment that Milo had stolen his patients. He was bitter enough, and it certainly sounded like a motivation. But something about it didn't feel quite right. Hillary was missing something, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She finished her consultation with Dr. Rutherford. He printed a piece of paper for her with the dietary information and a prescription for an herbal relaxant. Hillary wouldn't follow the diet, but she didn't say that. There was no reason not to be polite. She would consider the medication, though. Hillary walked to the reception desk to take care of the bill. She smiled at the receptionist, who didn't bother returning the smile, and Hillary left Dr. Rutherford's office. She climbed into her car and headed toward the store. Annabelle and Rose would have opened it already. She had arranged with them to come in a little later. As she drove, Hillary mulled over the conversation she'd had with Dr. Rutherford. Without needing to ask him anything outright, he had told her everything she needed to know about Grandview and how Rutherford felt about him. It seemed like he could have killed the man, but there was still something nagging at Hillary. Now that she was alone and able to think, she tried to pull it all apart. She went over the conversation carefully, dissecting each word, and found nothing. Frustrated, she pulled up in front of the shop and sat in the car for a second. Cindy Rutherford hurried past. She was eating an apple, and Hillary had to smile about that. Cindy was doing everything but stick to the diet Dr. Rutherford had been talking about. Hopefully, she was keeping to the times for their romantic connection. Suddenly, it hit Hillary. The fact that had been nagging at her hadn't been a part of the conversation about Milo Grandview. Instead, Dr. Rutherford had created his alibi without knowing it much earlier. If he spent every evening with Cindy from 6 o'clock onward, even on the night of the Harbor Hefeweizen opening, he couldn't have been the one to kill Milo Grandview. Chapter 7. The day proceeded without any drama. It was a nice change, and Hillary focused on her work at the store. She didn't agree with Dr. Rutherford's diet, but she did agree that she needed to focus on herself more and stress less about everyone else. So she wanted to do exactly that. There were so many things to mull over, but at the end of it, Hillary had decided only to focus on the things that were under her control. Annabelle's relationship was something that wasn't under her control. As hard as it was to let it go, Hillary knew that taking a step back may be just what she needed right now. "I'm going out to get lunch," Hillary said to Rose and Annabelle just before 1 o'clock. "What can I bring back for you?" Annabelle and Rose both told Hillary what sandwiches they wanted from the Antonio's menu. "A tuna mayo sub," Spot squawked from the corner. Hillary laughed. "Annabelle already fed you, old bird." "Fish gotta swim, birds gotta eat," Spot said, quoting Finding Nemo, one of Annabelle's favorite movies when she was a child. Hillary laughed again, shaking her head, and left the store. When she climbed out of her car in front of Antonio's, Preston came around the corner. Hillary smiled. "This is a nice surprise," she said. Preston smiled too. He embraced Hillary and kissed her on the cheek. "It's a nice surprise indeed. How is your day going?" They took a moment to catch up. "Where are you headed?" Hillary asked after they had exchanged pleasantries. "I'm going to Dr. Rutherford's office to question him," Preston said. "Word has it he was wildly unhappy about Milo Grandview, and I might as well start somewhere." "I was there this morning," Hillary said. Preston looked surprised. "One step ahead of me." Hillary smiled cheekily. "Always. And he didn't do it." "How do you figure that?" Hillary explained what she had been doing there, and what she found out. Dr. Rutherford was at home with Cindy, fasting and connecting romantically. Preston nodded, looking impressed. Then he asked, "Are you investigating this because you're trying to distract yourself from what's going on between us?" Hillary was taken aback by the question. She hadn't expected it. "Of course not," she said. "I'm doing it for Annabelle's sake. Protecting her future." Preston raised his eyebrows. "And how does that work? Is it all in search of her, Mr. Right? Was Milo Grandview on your list of possibilities?" Hillary shook her head. "We're getting off topic. You've never questioned my reasons for wanting to solve cases before, especially when you asked me to help." Preston sighed. "You're right. He wasn't trying to pick a fight or look for trouble." But lately, Preston had struggled to reach Hillary. He still saw her often, but he felt she was emotionally absent, and that worried him. He was nervous she would back off completely, and then his chance to finally be with her would be completely ruined. Preston had been chasing Hillary for a while now. Since she had moved to Rosemary Harbor, he'd had eyes for only her, even though she told him it wouldn't happen at first. He had been patient. Which was exactly why he didn't feel like being patient anymore. He had waited long enough, and she had made it clear that she was ready for more. For her to back off now would be unfair to him. If you're really so worried about Annabelle's future and waiting for the next target, you should go see Brody. He's single, Preston said, and he knew he sounded as irritated as he felt. Seeing Hillary had been great until he was reminded that her mind wasn't on her relationship with Preston at all. And that upset him. "Why are you upset?" Hillary asked. "Why don't you come to see me when you're willing to focus on your own life and not someone else's?" Preston turned around and walked toward Dr. Rutherford's offices, intent on questioning him anyway. He knew the information Hillary had found out was accurate. He trusted her instincts when it came to solving cases. As police chief, however, it was his responsibility to follow up on any leads himself. But he was also upset about Hillary's inability to commit. He would do his job as a distraction, if nothing else. Hillary watched Preston walk away, and she had no idea what was going on. He was upset, and she knew it was because she was involved with Annabelle's love life right now, but she hadn't realized he was so worked up about it. She huffed. How could he expect her to give up her worry over her daughter? Annabelle would always take precedence, no matter what. Deep down, though, Hillary knew that Preston deserved more than she was giving him. But she couldn't focus on him right now. She had bigger things that needed to take priority. She thought about what he said. Why had he mentioned Milo as a relationship prospect instead of Rafe? Maybe he had gotten the names confused because he knew that Hillary was trying to set Annabelle up with Rafe. Preston had also mentioned Brody Whiting, the pharmacist. He had been sarcastic with her, of course. But Brody wasn't a bad choice now that Hillary thought about it. Instead of walking to Antonio's and placing her lunch order, she turned toward the center across the road and headed toward the pharmacy. When she walked through the door, the pharmacy was empty. Brody Whiting stood behind the counter, and he looked like he'd been crying. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he was sniffling. It didn't take much for Hillary's motherly instincts to kick in. She could never stand it when someone was hurting, and this was a grown man crying. She walked toward the counter and fished in her bag, finding a packet of tissues. "Are you okay?" she asked when Brody blew his nose loudly. Brody shook his head. "I should be, but no, I'm not. I don't know how to handle a loss like this. Everyone else is going on as if nothing happened, but Milo was murdered. Murdered. Someone took his life and no one seems to care." Hillary reached across the counter and put her hand on Brody's shoulder, trying to comfort him. When he was so teary-eyed, he seemed so much younger. He couldn't have been a day over 30 as it was, but he looked like a lost child now. "I'm so sorry," Hillary said. She hadn't thought about Milo's death as something that would cripple those who were close to him. Hillary hadn't known Milo personally, and that always made the news of death so much easier to swallow. "He was a good man," Brody said. "So many people were upset with him, but he was a good man, and he didn't deserve to die." Brody broke down sobbing, and Hillary tried her best to comfort him. "How am I supposed to move on?" Brody asked through his sobs. "How am I supposed to pick up and carry on with my life as if one half of me hadn't just crumbled?" Hillary frowned. It sounded a lot like Brody was very attached to Milo. "Were you close?" Hillary asked. "We were together," Brody said. The news was a shock to Hillary. She hadn't known that Milo was gay. He had hidden it very well because it hadn't been a topic of discussion in town, as everything was when it came out. "I didn't know," Hillary said. Brody shook his head. Milo was worried that it would look bad and affect his business. Which I understand. The people here can be so cruel. But now, because no one knew, there is no sympathy for me. No one knows the pain I am going through, and I am in this completely alone. Hillary's heart went out to Brody. She understood what it was like to lose a loved one, but when Matthew died, Hillary had friends and family who were there to support her and help her when she needed to cry about it. And she'd had Annabelle as well. She couldn't imagine what it would have been like if she had gone through it all alone. And they had known about Matthew's condition, and that he wouldn't be around forever. Being able to prepare for a life without Matthew had helped Hillary in the long run. Brody had had no warning at all. They'd probably talked about the future together. And now it was all gone. "I lost my husband a couple of years ago," Hillary offered. "I know the pain. I know what you're going through." Brody was crying again, tears streaming down his cheeks, and Hillary wished there was something she could do to help. She knew very well that it didn't matter what anyone did, no matter how good their intentions. Only time could lessen the pain. Hillary thought about what Dr. Rutherford had said about Brody helping Milo fill the prescriptions. That, paired with the knowledge that they had secretly been lovers, changed everything. Questions burned in Hillary, but she wasn't going to ask Brody a single thing. It would be disrespectful to his feelings after he had suffered such a great loss. And he was a sniffling mess. She didn't want to make it all worse by being insensitive. The poor man already felt like he had no one to lean on, that he had to deal with the grief all alone. No one deserved to go through something as terrible as the loss of a loved one without at least a little support. Even though Hillary wasn't close to Brody, and she would probably never be, she hoped she could give him a little relief in the time she spent in the pharmacy. "Is there anything you needed?" Brody asked once he gained control over his emotions. "I doubt you came in here for the sake of consoling me." Hillary smiled gently at Brody and remembered the prescription in her pocket that Dr. Rutherford had given her. It had been pure luck that she had a front. She'd actually come into the pharmacy to consider Brody for Annabelle. But that wasn't going to happen for obvious reasons. "You don't have to worry about it right now," Hillary said. "It's not urgent, I was in the area." Brody shook his head. "No, please. Doing something will help. Work keeps me distracted. It's just been so darn quiet today. Not even Chelsea came in, but with Milo dead, that would make sense." He sniveled again. "Wait, what do you mean by that?" Hillary asked. Brody shook his head. "Chelsea is on a lot of pills. Too many. I know Milo is a little too easy to give out prescriptions, and when Chelsea realized that, she took advantage of him to the point where even Milo was about to cut her off." Hillary thought about that. Had Milo already told Chelsea he was cutting her off? If so, that was definitely a motive for murder for someone who might be addicted to pills. She vowed to track Chelsea down and talk to her. "Can I ask you a question?" Hillary asked. Brody nodded warily. "Do you know how long Rafe and Chelsea have been divorced?" Brody blinked. "Oh, that's very off topic. Only a few weeks, if it's official at all." Hillary widened her eyes. This wasn't what she had expected at all. She thought that they had been apart for years, although she didn't know why she thought that. "Can I fill that prescription for you?" Brody asked. Hillary nodded. She could respect his need to keep busy. She had thrown herself into her work as a means of distraction many a time. She took the prescription slip out of her handbag and handed it to Brody. His face cleared as he read the prescription and hurried away to fill it for Hillary. Chapter 8. Before Hillary headed home, she went on the hunt for information. Something Brody said was worrying. Chelsea and Rafe had only been divorced for a few weeks, he'd said. If at all. That was strange, considering how Rafe and Annabelle had been hitting it off. If he was recently divorced, he would be on the rebound, and that would be a bad match for Annabelle. But if he wasn't divorced at all? She finally found her answer from one of the women in town who hadn't been able to keep her mouth shut. It was one of Cindy's close friends, and Hillary was relieved the woman was willing to spill. Rafe and Chelsea's divorce had been finalized 2 days ago. 2 days. which meant that when Rafe had taken Annabelle out for coffee, he had still been married. And Annabelle hadn't said anything. Either she didn't know, or she had only been going along with it because she knew it would make Hillary happy. When Hillary arrived home, she was angry and frustrated. Every time she thought she had control of the situation, something got away from her. When she walked into Annabelle's room, her daughter was lying on her bed flipping through a bridal magazine. Hillary froze, staring at the magazine. "What's that?" she asked. Annabelle looked up. "A bridal magazine." "Why are you looking at it?" "Because if Giovanni and I get married, I want to know exactly what I want." Anger washed over Hillary. "Were you playing me this whole time?" she asked. "Did you think it would be funny to fake a relationship?" The more she talked, the louder it became. "I wasn't faking anything," Annabelle cried, angry now too. "Then what? Were you just hanging out with Rafe for fun?" "He was married until 2 days ago, Mom. It wasn't like I was going to be with the guy. We get along great, but as friends. He needed a shoulder to cry on." "You really thought I'd go on an actual date when I'm with Giovanni?" Hillary shook her head. She felt like an idiot because she hadn't known about the divorce that had still been pending. "I can't believe this," Hillary said. "I can't believe you're doing this to me." "What exactly am I doing to you?" "You're still with him. You're going to marry Giovanni, and then I'm going to lose you forever." "Is that what this is about?" Annabelle said, and she pushed up from the bed so that she was standing too. "You know that's what this is about. It's always been about this. Giovanni is not the guy for you, Annabelle. I won't allow out." Annabelle's eyes widened before she gave a laugh that only angered Hillary more. "You still think you have a say in this," Annabelle said. "I don't care how much you hate him. I love him and I want to be with him, and nothing is going to change that." Hillary shook her head. It was too much to take in. Annabelle was directly defying her, and what was worse, she had the right to do it. She was an adult, after all. Hillary couldn't tell her daughter what to do anymore. No matter how hard it was for her to give up control and let go. "Why can't you just let me date whoever I want?" Annabelle asked. "I'm not you. I'm not going to date someone like Daddy. I have my own taste and my own dreams for the future, and I know who I want in my life and what I am willing to put up with. You can't tell me what I need to do. I'm still your mother." "You are. But you have to trust that you raised me right and let me do the rest now. You're not here to parent me anymore. That ended when I finished high school, just about. You're here to support me and be my friend." Hillary shook her head. Annabelle was completely right, but it was hard to hear. It was hard to know that she wasn't needed as a mother anymore. As a friend, there was so little she could do to protect her daughter. "So I would really appreciate it if you stayed out of my business and out of my relationship," Annabelle said, folding her arms across her chest. "Just let me date whoever I want to date without judging me for it. You're making it hard for me to be with Giovanni because every time I'm with him, I know that you don't want me to be. I can't just enjoy myself." "That's rich coming from you," Hillary snapped. "Why?" "Because it's not like you are letting me move on and date who I want without judging me. Do you think that the way you're acting doesn't affect my relationship with Preston?" They both froze. Hillary didn't realize that it had been weighing on her heart so heavily. Annabelle was shocked, and she stared at her mother. She didn't realize that she had been putting so much pressure on Hillary to stay connected to Matthew. She had always been upset about the prospect of her mother dating Preston, and she had made it very clear that she didn't like that her mother was moving on. But since she had met Giovanni, Annabelle had been distracted, and she hadn't thought about it as much. She was still hard on Hillary about it, and she had never considered how it could feel from the other side. Now that Annabelle was in a relationship, everything was different. She tried to imagine what it would be like if she had someone she'd cared about, but it had ended, and Hillary had expected her to hold on to it rather than moving on to someone new. It wasn't fair at all. Hillary sighed and sank down onto Annabelle's bed. All the fight had left her when she admitted something she hadn't thought consciously about since the whole business started. Now that it had been put into words, she was exhausted. She had fought for so long to push it all away, hadn't she? I didn't know that's how you feel, Annabelle said carefully, the fight also going out of her voice. She walked to the bed and sat down next to Hillary. I didn't either, Hillary admitted. But Preston is really a good man. I care for him. I wasn't ready to move on at first. Daddy will always be the man that holds my heart, but I am ready now. And it's not a bad thing to move on, Annabelle. I know you miss Daddy. I miss him too. When Hillary looked up at Annabelle, her daughter had tears in her eyes. Hillary pulled Annabelle into a hug. I know it's still hard. It's been years and we've done so well, but it's not easy to live without someone who completed us. Annabelle nodded on Hillary's shoulder. But the same way you deserve to be happy, I deserve it too. Yes, Matthew died. But I can't carry on alone for the rest of my life. I don't want to. Annabelle let go of Hillary and looked down at her hands. I understand, she said. I didn't look at it that way. She looked up at Hillary. It's hard for me to see you with someone else when all I've ever known was you with Daddy. Hillary nodded. It was strange for me at first too. I guess I was so upset about Daddy being gone that I was angry with you for it. I thought if you dated Preston, it would only be so much worse, that you would forget Dad altogether. Hillary shook her head. Never. I will never forget your father. Not only did we have 25 wonderful years together, he was my best friend. We built our lives together, and we had you. I always have a part of him with me, right here. Tears rolled over Annabelle's cheeks. But there are different ways to love people. Even romantically. What I feel for your father will never go away, but I really like Preston a lot, and I want to see if it works with him. Annabelle nodded. I think I understand where you're coming from. I feel the same about Giovanni. It was hard for Hillary to hear Annabelle comparing Matthew to Giovanni, but she bit her tongue and let her daughter speak. I know you don't always like him, but I know him in a different way than you do. And I need different things in a relationship than you think. Hillary took a deep breath and nodded. I understand that. It's just hard for me because you deserve the best. I want only the best for you, and Giovanni just isn't who I had in mind for you. I know, Annabelle said. But it's all about compromise, right? You and Dad taught me that. No one is perfect, but we need to accept the bad with the good. And if it balances out right, it's okay. Hillary nodded. It was exactly what she had always taught Annabelle. She had raised her daughter well, after all. She looked at Annabelle and saw her daughter not as the baby girl she had been handed at the hospital so many years ago, but as the woman she had become. She was beautiful and strong, and Hillary was proud to be Annabelle's mother. And Annabelle was right. Hillary had no right to tell her who to love anymore. She had no right to be judgmental of Giovanni when she didn't know much about him, and she had to let Annabelle make her own choices. You have turned into such a beautiful young woman, Hillary said. Dad would be so proud. More tears rolled over Annabelle's cheeks before she wiped them away. I miss him, she said. Me too, Hillary said. Every day. It's an ache that never goes away. And it probably never will. Annabelle nodded. Losing Dad was hard. I didn't think it got to me so badly, but every time we talk about it, I feel like crying the same way I did when he first passed away. Annabelle looked up at Hillary and noticed her mom had tears in her eyes too. It wasn't easy to talk about her father, and Annabelle realized she had been selfish. She had mourned the loss of her dad, and she had been angry that Hillary was willing to move on when she hadn't thought about what it had done to her mother to lose her father, too. Hillary had suffered even more pain than Annabelle had. She had lost a husband, her other half. Annabelle hadn't understood that until now when she was so serious about Giovanni. She couldn't imagine dealing with it if he died, and they had only been together for 6 months or so. Not 25 years like her mom and dad had been. Annabelle felt bad that her reaction to Hillary's relationship with Preston had made it so hard for Hillary to find happiness. She realized that it was because of how she was all the time that her mom hadn't committed to Preston. Lately, Preston had been upset with Hillary. "Mom, is Preston mad at you?" Annabelle asked. Hillary sighed and nodded. "He is." "Why?" "Because I'm focusing on your love life more than my own." Annabelle shook her head. She was sure that wasn't the only reason. It had to be because Hillary was so reluctant to commit. No man was willing to wait forever. Still, it was at least partly because of Annabelle that things weren't working out for her mother, she realized with a shock. And that wasn't fair at all. She felt terrible about it. "I'm so sorry," Annabelle said, and she was crying again. "I ruined everything for you." "No, honey," Hillary said, rubbing Annabelle's back. "You didn't ruin everything. It's largely my fault." Annabelle shook her head. "No, I know it's because of me that you're not fully together. You would have been for so long already if I hadn't been a brat about it." Hillary hugged Annabelle again. Her daughter was owning up to mistakes. It had taken a while for the two of them to see eye to eye, but they were finally getting somewhere. It seemed neither of them had realized how hard it had been to deal with Matthew's death. They had both put their heads down and pushed on, but they had never really talked about the smaller details like love and moving on, and they had never analyzed how well they were dealing with the actual death. Talking about how they felt was something Hillary and Annabelle should have done a long time ago. They sat together in silence for a long time, but it was companionable silence. It was comfortable and warm. It was healing. Hillary had always prided herself on her close relationship with Annabelle, glad that she wasn't always fighting with her or even estranged as some other mothers were. But it turned out that they hadn't been as close as she had liked to imagine, and there had been a lot to talk about. Hillary also felt calm about what had come to light. It had all been subconscious, but she had been worried about her relationship with Preston for so long, for Annabelle's sake, that she hadn't noticed how uptight she had become about it. It had taken her happiness away, and a lot of it was purely because they hadn't talked about it. Communication was so important and so easily overlooked. "So tell me," Hillary finally said, "what do you like so much about Giovanni?" "Why?" Annabelle asked, and she looked suspicious. Hillary was suddenly sad that Annabelle would be suspicious about her mother, asking about her love life at all. It wasn't what she wanted their relationship to be like. "Because I admit that I handled it wrong. I judged him by what I knew and didn't try to get to know him for myself. And I never asked you how you feel and what you want. So I'm taking that first step. I'm trying." Annabelle smiled and her face lit up. "He loves history," she said. "He seems like a little bit of a ragamuffin at first glance, but he likes classic things. Like wine and history and art. He's different than the other guys who only go with what's cool to impress their friends." Hillary nodded. "That is different." Annabelle nodded. She glanced at Hillary as if she was uncertain if she could trust the piece, but she carried on. "He has a bad past with a lot of women. I know that worries you. But he has very low self-esteem, and he tries to make up for it. He's changed since we started dating. That means something to me." Hillary took a breath. "I see where you're coming from. I can't change my mind overnight, but I can promise you that I will make an effort to get to know him and form a fair opinion of him before I judge." Annabelle nodded. "That really means a lot to me, Mom. Thank you." Will you do something for me in return? Hillary asked. Annabelle looked suspicious again. I know you're talking about marriage. I don't know if it's because of my pending relationship with Preston, or if you're really thinking about marrying him, but it's very soon into your relationship. Please consider waiting until you've been together for 2 years at least. If you get engaged, that's fine. But don't jump into marriage so quickly. And it's not a bad idea to move in together before tying the knot either. But if I know I want to be with him now, why wait? Because infatuation can last longer than you think, and it's not a bad thing to get to know someone in all their forms before you decide to be together forever. Annabelle thought about it for a while before she nodded. That makes sense, she said. I'll wait a while. But I have to admit, talking about getting engaged was to distract you from Preston. I know it was wrong. I'm sorry. She reached for the magazine. I was just paging through this to look at the dresses, though. They're beautiful. Hillary smiled. You used to love wedding dresses as a child. Annabelle nodded. Mom, she said, I'll do the same for you. I'll get to know Preston and let you date him without making a fuss about it. I understand now what you were trying to do, and I'll keep an open mind for you too. Hillary smiled and hugged Annabelle. They held on a little longer than normal. A lot had happened the past several years, and life had gotten away with them. But it was something special when they could come full circle and touch base. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad if Annabelle was with Giovanni after all. And if it was, Hillary hoped to have Preston by her side to help her through the hard times. Chapter 9. The next morning, Hillary arranged with Annabelle to go on ahead and open the shop. She had business to attend to first. She would come into the shop a little later. Annabelle was more than happy to accommodate her. Now that they had had a heart-to-heart about their relationships, everything had changed. It was as if they had become best friends overnight, and Annabelle was willing to let Hillary do what she needed to do. Hillary stopped in front of the police station and climbed out of the car. For the first time in a long time, she was nervous to go and see Preston. They hadn't exactly parted well, and Hillary hoped that it wasn't too late. When she walked into the station, the two receptionists smiled at her. They both knew Hillary well, not only as Preston's friend, but as the owner of something special. After finding out that Preston was already in his office, Hillary walked through the station and stopped in front of Preston's door. She took a moment to pull herself together, to tell herself that no matter what the outcome was, she would do the right thing, and lifted her hand to knock. When she opened the door on Preston's invitation, he looked surprised to see her. Do you have a moment? Hillary asked. Preston nodded without hesitation. That had to be a good sign. Hillary closed the door behind her and sat down opposite Preston, her handbag clutched on her lap, feet and knees pressed together. I want to apologize, she started. For being so caught up in everything else, rather than paying attention to you and where our relationship is headed. Preston stayed silent and waited for Hillary to make her case. You were right, she continued. I was too focused on Annabelle. I was worried that I was losing control and that I would lose my daughter in the process, and I sacrificed things that were too important. I didn't admit what was really holding me back. Preston frowned. What was holding you back? I was worried about what Annabelle would say about my relationship with you. To the point that I was scared I would lose her if I made my own choices. But I was wrong. Wrong to let her influence me so much when all I should have done was talk to her about it. And wrong to keep you on a line without saying yes or no. I'm sorry about that. Hillary continued to tell Preston about the conversation she and Annabelle had the previous night and how well it had gone. They had had a long talk, and in the end they had called a truce. After she was finished, Preston rubbed his chin, thinking about it. You said that you weren't paying attention to where our relationship is headed just now, Preston said. Hillary nodded. So, where is our relationship headed? Hillary looked down at her hands, suddenly shy. I hope we can head toward being together. I want to be with you. When Preston didn't respond, Hillary looked up at him. He had a smile on his face. Really? Officially? Hillary nodded. Officially. I've wanted it for a while, but Matthew and Annabelle were holding me back in some ways. But I feel like I've jumped a hurdle after last night. The talk I had with Annabelle cleared the air, and it made me realize some things. I want to try with you. I really do like you. A lot. Preston stood up and walked around the desk. He took Hillary's hand and pulled her up so that she was standing. He put his hands on her cheeks, looking into her eyes, and then kissed her. I am so happy to hear that, he said. I've wanted to be with you since I laid my eyes on you. I've been waiting for you. That's a long time to wait. Preston nodded. But every minute was worth it. He kissed her again, and Hillary melted. Preston was an amazing man, and she knew she had made the right choice. Preston's phone rang, and he reached across the desk to answer it. When he hung up, his face was all business. I have to go. They brought Brody in. The pharmacist? Hillary asked. Why? It's in connection with the Milo Grandview case. Walk with me, I need to get to the holding cells. Preston opened his door, and Hillary followed him through the station. He didn't kill Milo, she said. They were lovers. He's innocent. Preston nodded. I know. I questioned him yesterday afternoon. Then why do you have him here? Hillary asked. She kept picturing the sniffling Brody, so young and heartbroken. Milo Grandview wrote illegal prescriptions that Brody filled even though he knew it was wrong. It's a crime and he's under arrest. Hillary was suddenly sad. She knew that it was something Brody had to be punished for. If he had been filling false prescriptions, he had known he was taking a risk, and he couldn't be let off the hook. Hillary had no doubt that Brody had done it out of love for Milo. It was wrong, but love made people do crazy things. Preston allowed Hillary to come with him. He led her into the office behind the two-way mirror before he walked into the other room. Do you know why you're here? Preston asked. Brody nodded, and Hillary's heart went out to him. The poor man looked terrified. If you're willing to admit to it, then the law will be a little more lenient than if you deny it. Are you willing to make a statement? Brody nodded right away. It was for Milo. It was all for him. I knew it was wrong, but he was so happy the past year. Brody started crying again. He died happy. Preston's face softened, and Hillary knew this was what she loved about Preston. Even though his job was to catch criminals who had committed heinous crimes, he never forgot that beneath all the wrong they had done, there were people who were scared, people who had motives, people who had emotions that had driven them to do what they had done. He never forgot that everyone was hurting. Mr. Whiting, I know this is hard for you. I know the death of Milo Grandview is something that will be difficult to deal with, and I will do my best to see to it that you are treated as well as you deserve. But you have committed a crime, and you will have to take your punishment for it. I know, Brody wailed. I know. He covered his face with his cuffed hands. Preston walked to him and put his hand on Brody's shoulder. It was exactly what Hillary would have done. I'm going to get someone to process you now and take you to a holding cell. I'm sorry it's come to this, Brody. I truly am. And Preston was sorry. Every time there was a murder or a theft or something else, Preston sympathized with the victims and the criminals alike. He never lost touch with his humanity, and it was never just a job to him. Preston was a great man. When Preston came to Hillary after Brody had been taken away, still sobbing, he looked like a wreck. It's so hard to send them to jail when they look so fragile, he said. Hillary nodded. I know. You were very good to him, though. So kind. I appreciate that, Preston said. Hillary wrapped her arms around Preston, willing to be there for him in his time of need. She wanted to be there for him through all his difficult times, no matter what. "Where are you with the investigation now?" Hillary asked, after they had untangled themselves from each other, and they walked back to Preston's office. "I've been wanting to talk to Chelsea Slavin. It sounds like she might be addicted to pills, and that Milo was about to cut her off. That's a definite motive." Preston shook his head. "Someone alerted us to Chelsea's pill habit. Unfortunately, she has a solid alibi for the night of the murder. Was out of town and has proof." "There goes that idea," Hillary thought. Then she asked, "What about Rafe?" Preston stopped and frowned at Hillary. "What about Rafe?" he asked. "Oh, you don't know? I thought that you would have spoken to Milo's neighbor." Preston shook his head. "When we went to question the neighbors, the woman that lived next to Milo wasn't in. We tried a couple of times until we found out from the next house that she was away on a business trip." "Why?" "I talked to her the night Milo was murdered. I was waiting out on the curb for you, and she came out thinking I was looking for something." "What did she say?" Preston asked. Hillary could see his detective face slipping back into place. He was on the case. "She said that she saw Rafe exiting Milo's house alone not long before he was killed. She said she was surprised Rafe had managed to see him because Milo was always so busy, but she assumed he'd managed." "This changes everything," Preston said, speeding up to get to his office. "Rafe also came into the store to buy a gift for Milo. He never said what it was for, and I was a little distracted to notice he was avoiding my question." "What did he buy?" Hillary shook her head. "Nothing. He couldn't decide. Now I wonder if maybe he was looking for a gift as a ruse to get into Milo's house." She thought of something else. "But I do have one more piece of news, even if it is just something I noticed," she said. "It might not be anything, though. It's only a guess." "What?" Preston asked. Hillary was very good at deductive reasoning, and Preston had realized a long time ago that she followed her gut and that it was usually right. She very rarely had evidence, but when they found out what happened after the case was solved, Hillary's hunch usually proved to have been right. So he wanted to know what she had thought of, even if it was just a guess. Rafe and Annabelle were quite late for the opening of Harbor Hefeweizen. "Remember that night? We were a little late as it was, and it took a while for Annabelle and Rafe to arrive. It would have been enough time for him to stop at Milo's place," Preston said, carrying on with Hillary's train of thought. "And it was a good night to do it, seeing that almost everyone would have been at the opening." "Everyone except Milo," Preston said. Which seems strange because he was so popular, but it still doesn't change that Rafe could very well have done it. "I need to make a couple of calls." Hillary nodded. Preston was in high gear now. He made calls, alerted a team as to where he was going, and made another call to the morgue to have the file on Milo sent to him again. It was good to watch him in action, a man truly dedicated to his job. "Come on," Preston said when he put the phone down. "We're headed out there to pick him up ourselves." "You're not sending a team?" Hillary asked. Preston shook his head. "I want to see how he reacts when we cuff him. We'll know if he's guilty, I'm sure of it." Hillary nodded and jumped up, ready to go out with Preston. It wasn't really her place to be present at an arrest, but she wanted to be there. While they drove, Hillary admitted that she had tried to set her daughter up with Rafe. "I was such a fool, blinded by my worry for Annabelle. I was so worried about her being with Giovanni that I was willing to set her up with someone who could be a killer." Preston shook his head. "You couldn't have known. Besides, we don't know that he did it for sure yet. Although I'm almost sure he did if I have to be honest. And you were only looking out for your daughter. Your mother's instinct overrides all else." Hillary smiled. "You're being very kind about this, but I know I was acting a little crazy." Preston glanced sideways at Hillary. "I happen to find a little crazy very attractive." Hillary smiled and blushed. They stopped in front of the building where Revenge Body, Rafe's fitness club, was situated. Hillary and Preston both climbed out and found Rafe in the studio, working out while looking at himself in the mirror. Hillary was glad there were no clients around, for Rafe's sake. "Mr. Slavin," Preston said, and Rafe stopped lifting his weights. "Can I help you, Chief? I need to bring you in for questioning regarding the murder of Milo Grandview." Rafe froze for a second. Then, out of nowhere, he tried to swing for Preston. Preston, somehow anticipating it, ducked, and Rafe lost his balance with the force he put behind the swing. Instead of correcting his balance, he touched both hands to the floor and pushed up again, running for the door. Preston ran after him. Rafe almost got away, but the door wouldn't open immediately, and Preston caught up with him. Rafe got through the door, but as soon as he was outside, Preston was on him. He tackled Rafe to the ground. Hillary had her hands pressed to her mouth in shock and horror as she ran after them. The two men scuffled on the ground, Rafe trying to get away, but Preston was on top and he managed to wrestle Rafe's hands behind his back and cuff him. When Rafe was in cuffs, Preston radioed for backup. He wasn't going to take a chance with Rafe by getting him to the station alone. "You are under arrest for the murder of Milo Grandview, for assault on a police officer, and for obstructing arrest," Preston said. It was just getting worse and worse. "What was I supposed to have done?" Rafe yelled. "You shouldn't have run for starters," Preston said. "But I didn't do anything wrong." "Are you saying you didn't kill Milo Grandview?" "I'm saying the asshole deserved it." It was a confession. Hillary couldn't believe Rafe would do something so horrible. He had seemed so nice. "No one deserves to die," Hillary said. Rafe looked up at her as if seeing her for the first time. "He was sleeping with my wife. He slept with Chelsea and I lost her." Hillary shook her head and Preston did too. "Milo was gay," Hillary said. "He was in the closet, but he wasn't interested in your wife. She just went to Milo for pills." Rafe pulled a face. "So all of it was for nothing?" Backup arrived and two officers jumped out, one reading Rafe his rights before he was escorted away with an officer on each side, in case he tried something again. "What was he saying about his wife?" Preston asked when Rafe had been taken away. "Chelsea and Rafe had gotten a divorce recently. I'm starting to guess it was because he thought she was sleeping with Milo." "That's a motive," Preston said. "Except that it wasn't true. So he lost his wife and his future." "What bugs me," Preston said, "is that he was disgusted that it was a waste, but he never looked remorseful." Hillary nodded. She agreed. Apparently, Rafe Slavin wasn't nearly as nice as she had thought. Epilogue. Hillary walked to the mirror and turned, checking that everything was in order. The green dress she had chosen to wear made her eyes stand out, and her auburn hair was elegantly pinned back in a chignon. It was 2 months later, and the police ball was finally here. Hillary grabbed a black shawl that she had bought with the dress and walked to Annabelle's room, where Annabelle was putting on the last of her makeup. "Are you almost ready?" Hillary asked. Annabelle and Giovanni had been invited to the police ball at Hillary's request. The past 2 months, Hillary had gotten to know Giovanni, really putting in the effort, and she had realized she'd been very wrong about him. He was a good man, she merely hadn't allowed herself to see it. "I am," Annabelle said and turned to Hillary. "Wow, Mom. Preston is going to lose his mind when he sees you." Hillary blushed and laughed. "Thank you, honey. You look beautiful too." Annabelle had put on a more modern black dress with sky-high heels, and her long hair hung in curls over her shoulders. Annabelle left to go to Giovanni's before they headed to the ball. A while later, Preston arrived. He stepped out of the car in a tux with a bow tie that matched Hillary's dress and walked to the door to collect Hillary. "My lady, you look breathtaking," he said and took Hillary's hand, kissing her knuckles. Hillary blushed, and Preston kissed her on the lips for good measure. "Are you ready to go?" Hillary nodded. The town hall had been transformed for the police ball, and it was spectacular. Preston and Hillary danced along with the other guests, and Hillary was more than happy to be there as Preston's girlfriend. The past 2 months with Preston had been wonderful. He had been gallant and charming, and now that Hillary had told him that she was happy to be with him officially, he had pulled out all the stops and pampered her and treated her like a queen. When she was down, he was there to support her and vice versa. The relationship was relaxed, and Hillary could truly say she was happy. The music stopped, and everyone stopped dancing to see what was happening. Giovanni and Annabelle were in the middle of the dance floor. Annabelle looked confused when Giovanni asked everyone to back up a bit and create a circle. Preston and Hillary stepped closer to see what was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me a chance to speak," Giovanni said. "I know I am stealing the show, but I couldn't wait another minute." He turned to Annabelle. "My darling, you are the love of my life. You make me feel like I can be myself, and I never have to prove myself to you. You are my sunshine when the skies are gray, my shelter in the storm. I love you so much." Hillary looked at Preston, who squeezed her hand. Hillary had a feeling what was going to come next, and she couldn't say she was upset about it. She would have been 2 months ago. But a lot had changed, and she felt very differently about Giovanni. When Giovanni kneeled, Annabelle clasped her hands to her mouth and her eyes welled up with tears. Giovanni produced a ring. "Will you make me the luckiest man on earth? Annabelle Sheridan, will you marry me?" Annabelle nodded. Giovanni stood up and kissed Annabelle, and everyone cheered and applauded. Annabelle looked ecstatic, and Giovanni grinned from ear to ear as guests started to congratulate them. "How do you feel about this?" Preston asked. "To be honest, I'm okay with it." "Really?" Hillary nodded and looked at Preston. "I know that there will be times when I wonder if Annabelle is making the right decision. But she is old enough to think for herself, and Giovanni isn't a bad person. I believe you were the one to tell me that not too long ago." Preston smiled. "I'm glad you listened." Hillary looked at Annabelle again. "I think I'm going to have my hands full with the wedding planning when they decide on a date, but that's something I'll just have to deal with." Preston laughed. Everyone knew that a bride was difficult, and Annabelle was already a handful. But he was happy for them if Hillary was happy, and Hillary looked perfectly content with life. Together, they walked to the newly engaged couple to congratulate them. Thanks for listening to Sticky Sweet, Book 6 from Rosemary Harbor Cozy Mystery Series by Wendy Meadows and read for you by Michelle from Google AI.